The fracturing of the Traitor Legions began not with a single catastrophic event, but through a gradual disintegration that accelerated during the Great Scouring. When Horus fell at the hands of the Emperor aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the remaining traitor forces found themselves without unified leadership. The Sons of Horus, once the most prestigious of the Traitor Legions, became the first to truly shatter. Their defeat at the Battle of Harmony and the subsequent theft of Horus's corpse by the Emperor's children triggered a cascade of vengeance killings and internecine warfare. Fabius Bile's involvement in cloning experiments using their fallen Warmaster's genetic material only deepened the divisions. The legion that had led the heresy splintered into dozens of competing factions, with the largest eventually becoming the Black Legion under Abaddon the Despoiler, though many warbands rejected his authority entirely. The World Eaters experienced perhaps the most dramatic transformation. Angron's ascension to demonhood during the Siege of Terra removed what little restraint the Primarch had provided. The Butcher's Nails, those archaeotech implants that drove the Legion toward uncontrollable rage, ensured that any attempt at unified command devolved into bloodshed. Captains who tried to maintain Legion structure found their own warriors turning on them in berserk fury. The World Eaters scattered into the Eye of Terror as individual warbands, each led by champions who could temporarily dominate their fellows through sheer violence. These warbands rarely numbered more than a few hundred warriors, as larger concentrations inevitably collapsed into internal slaughter. The Emperor's children followed a different path of disintegration. Their pursuit of sensation and excess, already advanced before the heresy's end, accelerated within the Eye of Terror. Fulgrim's transformation into a demon prince left him increasingly detached from his legion's activities, more interested in his own hedonistic pursuits than military command. The Emperor's children fragmented along lines of obsession and specialty. Some warbands dedicated themselves to the perfection of specific combat techniques, practicing the same killing strikes for centuries. Others pursued sonic weaponry to ever greater extremes, their noise marines becoming the core of forces that treated warfare as performance art. Still others vanished into the depths of Slaanesh's domain, emerging only when their particular appetites demanded it. The Death Guard maintained greater cohesion than their brother legions, largely due to Mortarian's continued presence and the unifying nature of Nurgle's gifts. However, even they experienced significant fragmentation. The Plague Planet became their primary stronghold, but countless warbands departed to spread their patrons' blessings across the galaxy. These Death Guard warbands operated with considerable autonomy, though they generally acknowledged Mortarian's authority when their paths crossed. The nature of Nurgle's corruption encouraged a strange form of unity through shared affliction, but also allowed for independent operation, as each warband developed its own unique plagues and methods of infection. The Thousand Sons faced fragmentation of a fundamentally different nature. The rubric of Ahriman, cast in a desperate attempt to halt the flesh-change mutations ravaging the Legion, transformed the majority of their warriors into mindless automata. Only those with psychic talent retained their consciousness, creating a legion where sorcerers commanded dust-filled armor animated by their will. Magnus the Red's own transformation and retreat into the planet of the sorcerers meant that the Thousand Sons operated more as a loose confederation of sorceress cabals than a unified military force. Each sorcerer pursued their own research and schemes, gathering warbands of rubric marines and cultists to further their individual goals. The Night Lords rejected the Chaos Gods more thoroughly than any other traitor legion, yet they too fragmented completely. Conrad Kerr's death at the hands of an Imperial assassin removed any central authority, and the Night Lords' philosophy of rule through terror provided no framework for cooperation. Their warbands scattered throughout the galaxy, each led by captains who maintained the Legion's traditions of psychological warfare and civilian targeting. These Night Lords' warbands often operated as pirates and raiders, funding their operations through plunder rather than demonic patronage. The absence of unified chaos worship meant these warbands sometimes fought alongside other chaos forces, sometimes against them, guided only by opportunity and the desire to spread fear. The Iron Warriors maintained the most rigid internal structure of any traitor legion, a testament to Perturabo's obsessive need for order and siege warfare doctrine. However, even they experienced significant fragmentation. Warbands formed around individual warsmiths, each commanding their own grand company with considerable operational independence. These Iron Warriors' forces competed viciously for resources and recognition, turning their siege expertise against each other as often as against imperial targets. The fortress world of Medrengard became their primary stronghold, but the Iron Warriors' nature meant that even cooperation was transactional and temporary. The Word-bearers retained the greatest degree of Legion cohesion, their religious fanaticism providing a unifying ideology that transcended individual ambition. Lorger's vision of chaos worship as a structured faith, combined with the Dark Council's administrative oversight, meant that Word-bearers' warbands operated more like missionary expeditions than independent military forces. They maintained communication networks, shared resources, and coordinated their efforts to spread chaos worship throughout the Imperium. However, theological disputes still led to schisms, particularly regarding which chaos god deserved primacy, or whether undivided worship remained the truest path. The Alpha Legion's fragmentation remains the most mysterious and possibly most deliberate of all the Traitor Legions. Their culture of operational security and cellular structure meant that the Legion may have been designed to operate as independent cells from its inception. Whether the Alpha Legion truly serves chaos, pursues some hidden agenda, or has itself fractured into warbands with contradictory goals remains unclear. Alpha Legion warbands operate with extreme autonomy, rarely revealing their true objectives even to allied forces. The formation of new warbands follows patterns established during this initial fragmentation. Chaos champions rise through a combination of martial prowess, demonic favor, and the ability to dominate rivals. A space marine who survives the corrupting influence of the warp long enough develops both physical mutations and supernatural abilities that set them apart from their brothers. When such a champion gathers enough followers, either through persuasion or intimidation, a new warband emerges. These formations rarely occur peacefully. Trials by combat remain the most common method of establishing leadership, with challengers forced to prove themselves against the current leader or their chosen champion. Those who fail typically die, their gene seed and wargear claimed by the victor. Demonic favor plays an equally crucial role in warband formation. A chaos champion who catches the attention of one of the dark gods may receive gifts that elevate them above their peers. These blessings range from enhanced physical capabilities to demonic weapons, or even the transformation of their followers into something more than mortal. A word-bearer who successfully conducts a ritual that summons a powerful demon may find themselves leading a new warband, their success interpreted as divine mandate. An Emperor's Children champion who achieves a perfect kill might receive Slaanish's attention, their newfound prowess attracting followers who seek similar perfection. Resource disputes frequently trigger warband formation. The Eye of Terror, despite its vast size, contains finite resources that chaos forces compete to control. Demon worlds produce raw materials and slaves, but access to these resources requires the strength to claim and hold territory. When a warband grows too large to sustain itself on available resources, factions inevitably form. Junior officers gather their most loyal warriors and strike out to claim their own territories. These splits sometimes occur through negotiation, but more often through violence. The breakaway faction must prove itself capable of independent operation by seizing resources from rivals or launching raids into Imperial space. Ideological schisms drive warband formation as frequently as practical concerns. The nature of chaos worship encourages individual interpretation and personal revelation. A champion who experiences a vision from their patron god may become convinced that their warband's current leadership has strayed from the true path. These religious disputes escalate quickly in an environment where conviction can literally reshape reality. A faction that believes their interpretation of chaos doctrine is correct will fight to prove it, and the warp itself seems to reward those with the strongest faith. When neither side can dominate the other, the warband splits, each faction convinced of their own righteousness. The Badab War provides the most extensively documented example of a loyalist chapter's fall to chaos in the millennia following the heresy. Luft Huron, chapter master of the Astral Claws, began with legitimate grievances about the Imperium's failure to adequately support the Maelstrom warders. His gradual accumulation of power and resources in the Badab sector, combined with his refusal to submit to inquisitorial authority, led to open rebellion. The war lasted nearly a decade, with the Astral Claws and their allied chapters fighting against loyalist Space Marine forces. Huron's desperation drove him to increasingly extreme measures, including the use of forbidden technologies and eventual pacts with Chaos. The final assault on Badab Primaris left Huron horrifically injured, his survival only possible through extensive augmentation that transformed him into a cyborg monstrosity. The survivors of the Astral Claws fled into the Maelstrom, emerging as the Red Corsairs, a warband that would grow to rival the Black Legion in size and threat. The Red Corsairs represent a distinct category of Chaos warband, one built not from the fragments of Traitor Legions, but from more recently fallen Space Marines. Huron Blackheart, as he became known, actively recruited from other renegade chapters and even corrupted loyalist Marines through capture and indoctrination. His warband absorbed smaller groups of renegades, offering them resources and protection in exchange for service. This practice created a diverse force that combined the tactical doctrines of dozens of different chapters, making the Red Corsairs unpredictable and adaptable. Unlike the Traitor Legion warbands, which often remained locked in ancient patterns of warfare, the Red Corsairs employed recent Imperial tactics because many of their warriors had fought as loyalists within living memory. Other chapters fell to Chaos through different paths. The Violators turned traitor during the Horus Heresy itself, but escaped the initial purges, operating as a loyalist chapter for centuries before their true allegiance was discovered. The Crimson Slaughter fell to a Xenos curse that caused them to hear the screams of everyone they killed, driving them to Khorne worship as the only escape from madness. The Flawless Host pursued perfection so obsessively that they became susceptible to Slaanesh's temptations. Each of these chapters brought their own traditions and combat doctrines into the ranks of Chaos, adding diversity to the forces arrayed against the Imperium. The Long War defines how many Chaos warbands understand their existence and purpose. For veterans of the Horus Heresy, the conflict with the Imperium never ended. They retreated into the Eye of Terror not in defeat, but in temporary withdrawal, planning their eventual return. The time distortion within the warp means that warriors who fought at the Siege of Terra experience only decades or centuries, while millennia pass in real space. These heresy veterans maintain their hatred of the Imperium with undimmed intensity, remembering slights and betrayals as if they occurred yesterday. They speak of the Emperor's broken promises, of the persecution of Lorgar's faith, of the betrayal at Istvan, as immediate grievances rather than ancient history. This temporal disconnect creates tension within warbands that recruit newer renegades. A Chaos Lord who personally fought alongside Horus views the Imperium through the lens of the Great Crusade, remembering when the Emperor walked among his armies and the Primarchs led their legions. To such a warrior, the current Imperium represents a corrupted shadow of what humanity could have achieved. Newer recruits who turned from the Emperor's light in recent centuries know only the Imperium as it currently exists, a grinding totalitarian regime that crushes individuality and worships a corpse god. These different perspectives sometimes align in their hatred of the Imperium, but they can also create friction regarding tactics, objectives, and the very purpose of the Long War. The relationship between Chaos warbands and the Dark Gods operates on principles fundamentally different from the Imperial cult's worship of the Emperor. Where Imperial faith demands submission to distant authority, Chaos worship functions as transactional exchange. The ruinous powers grant tangible benefits to their followers, manifesting their favor through physical transformation, supernatural abilities, and demonic assistance. This immediate reciprocity creates loyalty structures based on demonstrated power rather than abstract theology. A warband's allegiance to specific Chaos gods shapes every aspect of their existence, from combat doctrine to internal hierarchy, and determines their place within the broader conflicts of the warp. The Black Legion stands as the most prominent example of undivided Chaos worship, though Abaddon the Despoiler's approach differs substantially from traditional veneration of all four dark gods. Abaddon refuses to kneel to any single chaos god, instead demanding that the ruinous powers serve his vision of destroying the Imperium. This audacious stance, which would see lesser champions consumed by demonic wrath, succeeds because Abaddon provides results. Each of his 13 Black Crusades, regardless of their apparent success or failure from an imperial perspective, advances specific objectives that benefit all 4 dark gods simultaneously. The War Master of Chaos, as he styles himself, maintains this precarious balance through sheer force of will and an unmatched record of achievements. The Black Legion draws recruits from all Traitor Legions and renegade chapters, united not by worship of specific gods, but by commitment to Abaddon's long war. The Warband structure accommodates cult troops dedicated to individual gods within its ranks, with Khorne Berserkers, Plague Marines, Noise Marines, and Rubric Marines all serving alongside warriors who maintain more balanced chaos corruption. The Word-Bearers represent the theological counterpoint to Abaddon's pragmatic approach. Their veneration of chaos undivided stems from Lorgar's original vision on Cadia, where he first witnessed the truth of the warp's nature. The Word-Bearers maintain that the 4 dark gods form a complete pantheon, each representing essential aspects of the universe's fundamental nature. Their dark apostles preach that favoring one god over others demonstrates incomplete understanding of chaos's true glory. This religious framework creates a structured hierarchy where the Dark Council on Sikaris coordinates the activities of multiple host warbands, each led by a dark apostle who functions as both military commander and high priest. The Word-Bearers conduct elaborate rituals that invoke all 4 chaos gods in sequence, offering prayers and sacrifices to each in turn. Their approach to chaos worship resembles organized religion more than the individualistic devotion common to other warbands, with standardized liturgies, established holy days, and formal theological debates about proper veneration methods. The Iron Warriors maintain undivided allegiance primarily through rejection of weakness rather than religious conviction. Perdurabo's Legion views dedicated worship of any single chaos god as limiting, a surrender of autonomy to forces that should serve as tools rather than masters. Their warsmiths bind demons into war engines and weapons, treating the entities of the warp as ammunition rather than objects of reverence. This utilitarian approach to chaos creates warbands that remain relatively free from the extreme mutations afflicting god-specific cult troops, though the Iron Warriors still accumulate warp corruption over centuries of exposure. Their demon engines, particularly the Decimator and the Hellbrute chassis they helped pioneer, demonstrate their philosophy of forcing demonic entities into subservient roles. The Iron Warriors prove that undivided allegiance need not mean equal veneration, but can instead represent refusal to submit completely to any single power. The transition from undivided worship to mono-god devotion transforms warbands at every level. A champion who pledges themselves entirely to one of the ruinous powers begins accumulating specific mutations that mark their dedication. Khornate warriors develop increased muscle mass and bone density, their skeletal structure reinforcing to support enhanced strength. Brass begins to grow through their skin, forming natural armor plates that fuse with their power armor. Their minds simplify higher cognitive functions, burning away as rage becomes their primary emotional state. The Butcher's nails that drove the World Eaters to madness represent an extreme example, but all Khorne worshippers experience some degree of neurological alteration. Tactical planning becomes difficult for dedicated Khornate warriors, their thoughts returning constantly to violence and bloodshed. Warbands that fully embrace Khorne often lose the ability to conduct complex operations, their attacks devolving into straightforward charges toward the nearest enemy. The World Eaters demonstrate how complete dedication to Khorne reshapes warband structure. Their largest formations rarely exceed company strength, because larger concentrations trigger the bloodlust that turns warriors against each other. A successful World Eaters warband requires a champion powerful enough to dominate through physical prowess, beating down challengers without killing so many followers that the warband becomes non-viable. These champions often bear names like the Bloodied or the Flayer, titles earned through countless duels and battles. The Warband's berserkers require constant direction toward external enemies, their aggression channeled outward through continuous raiding and combat. Between battles, World Eater's warbands often enter states resembling hibernation, their warriors locked in meditation chambers or training cages where they can vent their rage without decimating their own numbers. The arrival of combat brings them to full alertness, the scent of blood and the promise of slaughter focusing their attention with laser precision. Tzeentchian transformation follows entirely different patterns. Sorcerers who dedicate themselves to the Architect of Fate experience expanding psychic capabilities alongside physical mutations that reflect the changer of Wei's capricious nature. Additional eyes may sprout across their bodies, each capable of perceiving different aspects of reality or seeing into alternate timelines. Feathers emerge from their skin, often in impossible colors that hurt to observe. Their flesh becomes mutable, shifting in response to their thoughts or the proximity of warp energy. The most dedicated Tzeentchian sorcerers struggle to maintain consistent physical forms, their bodies flickering between multiple potential states. This instability extends to their warbands, where elaborate schemes and counter-schemes create Byzantine power structures. A Thousand Suns warband might pursue an objective that serves multiple purposes across different timelines, their sorcerer lord manipulating events to achieve outcomes that benefit them regardless of surface-level success or failure. The Thousand Suns operate as the archetypal Tzeentchian warband, though the rubric's effects create unique dynamics. The sorcerers who retain their consciousness command squads of rubric marines, their brothers reduced to animated armor filled with dust. These sorcerers pursue individual research projects and mystical investigations, gathering resources and artifacts to further their understanding of the warp. Their warbands function more as academic expeditions, backed by military force, than traditional raiding parties. A Thousand Suns sorcerer might spend decades researching a single arcane text, then launch a carefully planned strike to acquire a specific artifact mentioned in its pages. The rubric Marines provide utterly loyal troops who never question orders, never require rest, and maintain perfect discipline, but their lack of initiative means the sorcerers must micromanage every aspect of their warband's operations. Nurgle's blessings transform dedicated followers into walking plague vectors, their bodies bloating with disease and corruption. The physical changes begin with numbness, nerve endings dying as Nurgle's rot spreads through their tissues. This loss of pain sensation paradoxically grants resilience, as injuries that would incapacitate normal warriors barely slow the plague gods chosen. Their armor fuses with their flesh, the ceramite becoming organic as rust and corrosion spread across its surface. Pustules erupt constantly, weeping infectious fluids that pool within their armor and drip onto the ground wherever they walk. The stench becomes overwhelming, a miasma of rot and decay that precedes Death Guard warbands into battle. Dedicated Plague Marines develop an almost jovial disposition, Nurgle's gifts filling them with contentment despite their horrific condition. They laugh as they spread disease, genuinely believing they offer salvation through infection. Death Guard warbands maintain surprising cohesion despite their fragmentation from the original Legion. The shared experience of Nurgle's gifts creates bonds between warriors who might otherwise compete for dominance. A Plague Marine who encounters another of Mortarian's sons often greets them as a brother afflicted with the same blessed diseases, comparing symptoms and discussing the progression of their various plagues with the enthusiasm of collectors sharing their acquisitions. This camaraderie extends across different warbands, creating an informal network where Death Guard forces coordinate without formal command structures. A warband besieging an Imperial fortress might find reinforcements arriving from other Death Guard forces who heard of the battle and decided to participate, drawn by the opportunity to test their plagues against fresh victims. Slaaneshi transformation pursues perfection through excess, pushing every sensation and capability to extremes that transcend mortal limitations. The Emperor's children who fully embrace the Dark Prince develop heightened senses that perceive reality in overwhelming detail. A dedicated Slaaneshi warrior experiences combat as a symphony of sensation, every impact of their blade, every spray of blood, every scream of their victims registering with crystalline clarity. Their bodies become unnaturally graceful, movements flowing with impossible elegance even as mutations erupt across their flesh. These changes often take aesthetically disturbing forms, beauty and horror merging as extra limbs sprout to improve combat capability, or their faces reshape into masks of androgynous perfection that somehow appear more alien than human. The psychological changes prove equally dramatic as normal experiences lose their ability to satisfy. Slaaneshi champions require increasingly extreme stimulation, their pursuit of sensation driving them to acts of elaborate cruelty and artistic violence. Emperor's Children warbands organize around shared obsessions, each focusing on perfecting specific aspects of sensation or combat. A warband might dedicate itself to sonic warfare, their noise marines spending centuries refining the exact frequencies that cause maximum suffering. Another might pursue the perfection of blade work, their champions practicing the same strikes until they achieve a state of flow where thought and action merge. These specialized warbands often cooperate during major campaigns, each contributing their particular expertise to create overwhelming sensory assaults. The cacophony of a full Emperor's Children attack combines visual excess, sonic weaponry, chemical weapons that induce hallucinations, and close combat of such refined brutality that witnesses struggle to process what they observe. The patron system creates direct relationships between warbands and specific demonic entities who serve as intermediaries with the chaos gods. A greater demon or demon prince who takes interest in a warband provides guidance, resources, and direct intervention in exchange for service and sacrifice. These patrons demand regular offerings, with the specific requirements varying based on their nature. A bloodthirster patron expects constant warfare and the dedication of skulls taken in combat, measuring a warband's worth by their kill counts and the quality of enemies they face. A Lord of Change patron requires the acquisition of knowledge and the execution of elaborate schemes, testing their chosen warband's cunning and adaptability. A Great Unclean One patron demands the spread of specific plagues, rewarding warbands that successfully infect entire worlds with new strains of disease. A Keeper of Secrets patron pushes their followers toward ever greater acts of excess, providing blessings to those who achieve new heights of sensation and depravity. These patron relationships function as contracts, though the terms remain deliberately vague and subject to interpretation. A warband that pledges service to a demon prince gains access to that entity's power and knowledge, receiving guidance during campaigns and demonic reinforcements during critical battles. The patron benefits from the warband's actions in real space, as mortal followers can achieve objectives impossible for purely demonic forces. The emotional energy generated by the warband's activities feeds the patron, strengthening them within the great game that the chaos gods and their servants play among themselves. A particularly successful warband elevates their patron's status, while a warband's failure diminishes their demonic sponsor's position. This creates genuine investment from the patron, who monitors their chosen followers and intervenes when necessary to ensure their success. The dangers of switching patrons or falling from favor manifest with catastrophic consequences. A champion who attempts to abandon their patron for another chaos god risks immediate retribution. The spurned deity's demons hunt the traitor, while their former patron withdraws all blessings and curses them for their betrayal. The physical mutations granted by years of service begin to reverse, but not cleanly. A former cornate champion who turns to Tzeentch might feel their enhanced musculature tearing itself apart as their body tries to accommodate new sorcerous gifts, the conflicting energies creating agonizing instability. Their warband typically fractures during these transitions, as warriors loyal to the original patron refuse to follow their champion's new path. Those who remain face suspicion from their new god's established followers, who view them as unreliable converts likely to betray again when circumstances change. Falling from favor without switching allegiance proves equally destructive. A warband that fails to meet their patron's expectations finds their blessings withdrawn and their mutations becoming debilitating rather than empowering. A plague marine warband that fails to spread disease effectively might discover their blessed resilience fading, pain returning to bodies that had forgotten its touch. The diseases that sustain them begin consuming their flesh without regeneration, reducing them to rotting husks. A Tzeentchian warband whose schemes consistently fail might experience their mutations accelerating beyond control, their flesh shifting so rapidly that they lose all coherent form and dissolve into mindless chaos spawn. These transformations into spawn represent the ultimate failure for a chaos champion, their consciousness obliterated as their body becomes a mass of random mutations that serves only as a mindless beast. Renegotiating demonic contracts requires leverage that few warbands possess. A champion must offer something of sufficient value to interest their patron in modifying their arrangement, typically through completing a task of exceptional difficulty or acquiring an artifact of tremendous power. The negotiation itself takes place during rituals where the champion summons their patron or travels into the warp to meet them directly. These encounters carry inherent risks, as the demon might simply consume the supplicant rather than bargain with them. Successful renegotiations usually involve accepting additional responsibilities or deeper corruption in exchange for greater power. A warband might pledge to conduct a specific campaign that serves their patrons' interests within the Great Game, or agree to bind themselves more completely to their god's service in exchange for immediate reinforcements. The new terms always favor the demonic party, as the fundamental power imbalance ensures mortals negotiate from positions of weakness regardless of their achievements. The Chaos Lord who commands a warband maintains authority through methods that would appear barbaric to imperial observers, but function with brutal efficiency within the context of chaos forces. These champions rise to leadership not through political maneuvering or hereditary succession, but through demonstrated superiority in combat and the visible favor of dark powers. A Chaos Lord's position remains secure only as long as they can physically dominate challengers and continue delivering victories that please their patron deity. The moment weakness manifests, subordinates begin plotting their overthrow. This system creates leadership that embodies martial excellence and demonic blessing in equal measure, though it also ensures constant internal tension as ambitious champions watch for opportunities to seize command. The physical presence of a Chaos Lord typically reflects centuries or millennia of warp exposure and the accumulation of gifts from their patron god. A Cornate Lord might stand a full head taller than standard Chaos Space Marines, their armor fused with brass and bone growths that have erupted through the ceramite. Their weapons often bear demonic essence, axes that scream for blood or swords that burn with unholy fire. A Slaaneshi Lord moves with unnatural grace despite power armor that should make such fluidity impossible, their equipment decorated with excessive ornamentation that somehow enhances rather than impedes their combat effectiveness. Nurglite Lords present the most visually disturbing appearance, their armor split and corroded to accommodate bloated flesh, yet they demonstrate resilience that allows them to shrug off wounds that would kill lesser warriors. Tzeentchian Lords flicker with barely contained sorcerous power, their form sometimes shifting as the warp bleeds through their physical presence. The authority structure within a warband centers entirely on the Lord's personal power. They issue commands expecting immediate obedience, with hesitation interpreted as challenge. During combat operations, the Chaos Lord typically leads from the front, their presence inspiring followers through direct demonstration of their capabilities, rather than distant strategic direction. This hands-on leadership style creates genuine respect among warriors who value martial prowess above all other qualities. A Chaos Lord who hides behind their troops or relies too heavily on subordinates to achieve victories invites contempt and eventual overthrow. The Warband's warriors must witness their leader's superiority regularly, seeing with their own eyes that their commander deserves the position through continued excellence in battle. Succession through assassination represents the most common method of leadership change within Chaos Warbands. An ambitious champion who believes they have accumulated sufficient power to challenge the current Lord begins gathering supporters, testing loyalties among the Warband's warriors. The actual assassination attempt might occur during battle, when the chaos of combat provides cover for a blade in the back, or during supposed moments of peace when the Lord's guard drops. Some challenges occur openly, with the would-be successor announcing their intention and facing the Lord in direct combat. The method matters less than the outcome. If the challenger succeeds, they assume command immediately, and the warband accepts their leadership without question. Those who supported the fallen lord typically pledge loyalty to the new commander rather than face execution. If the challenger fails, their death serves as an example, and the lord's position strengthens through the demonstration of their continued dominance. Ritual combat provides a more formalized succession method, particularly among warbands with strong religious traditions. The word-bearers occasionally employ this approach when a dark apostle's leadership comes into question, staging elaborate ceremonies where challenger and incumbent fight before the assembled host. The ritual's specific requirements vary based on the warband's traditions and patron deity. A cornate warband might conduct their challenge in a simple arena, with the combatants fighting until one dies. A Tzeentchian warband could require a contest of sorcery, where the participants duel through psychic manifestations and summon demons. A Nurglite challenge might involve both participants consuming identical toxins, with victory going to whoever survives the poison's effects while still capable of slaying their opponent. These ritual combats serve dual purposes, determining leadership through strength of arms while also entertaining the warband's patron deity, whose favor often manifests during the contest to aid their preferred champion. The Dark Council structure employed by larger warbands creates an advisory body that helps the Chaos Lord manage complex operations without diluting their absolute authority. This system appears most prominently among the word-bearers, where the original Dark Council on Sikaris coordinates multiple host warbands across the galaxy. Individual host-level Dark Councils typically include 4 to 7 members, each commanding specialized divisions within the warband and advising the Dark Apostle or Chaos Lord on matters within their expertise. The council members maintain their positions through the Lord's favor rather than independent power bases, though the most capable advisors accumulate significant personal authority over time. A Chaos Lord who ignores their Dark Councils, Council too frequently either proves their superiority through continued success or finds themselves facing a unified coup when their decisions lead to disaster. Sorcerers occupy the most influential Dark Council positions in warbands that value psychic power. These individuals command the warband's psychic assets, maintaining the rituals that bind demons into weapons and vehicles, conducting the divinations that guide strategic planning, and unleashing devastating warp-based attacks during combat. A powerful sorcerer advising a Chaos Lord provides capabilities that purely martial champions cannot match. Their ability to perceive future timelines and manipulate reality through ritual making them invaluable despite the inherent danger they represent. The relationship between a Chaos Lord and their chief sorcerer requires careful balance. The Lord must demonstrate enough psychic resistance or raw power to prevent the sorcerer from simply dominating their mind and seizing control, while the sorcerer must prove their loyalty and usefulness to avoid execution as a potential threat. Warbands that successfully maintain this balance gain tremendous advantages. Combining martial excellence with sorceress might in ways that overwhelm opponents who face only one threat or the other. Dark Apostles function as both military commanders and high priests within warbands that maintain structured chaos worship. These individuals lead the religious ceremonies that bind the warband together ideologically, deliver sermons that reinforce devotion to the chaos gods, and interpret omens to guide the warband's actions. A Dark Apostle's authority derives from their theological knowledge and their ability to channel divine favor through ritual. They typically command the warband's possessed marines and summon demons, their religious authority making demonic entities more willing to cooperate with mortal forces. The Dark Apostle's role becomes particularly crucial before major battles, when they conduct rituals that invoke their patron deities' blessing upon the warband's warriors. These ceremonies range from simple prayers and sacrifices to elaborate multi-day rituals involving the entire warband, depending on the operation's importance and the desired level of divine intervention. Warpsmiths represent the dark mirror of the Adeptus Mechanicus, tech priests who have embraced chaos and turn their knowledge of machinery toward corrupted purposes. These specialists maintain the Warband's equipment, but their methods involve binding demonic entities into war engines and weapons rather than following standard maintenance protocols. A warpsmith can repair damaged vehicles through a combination of mechanical skill and sorcerous ritual, sometimes improving the equipment beyond its original specifications by incorporating demonic essence into its core systems. They oversee the creation and maintenance of demon engines, those walking war machines that combine mechanical components with bound demons to create weapons that think and hate. The Warpsmith's workshop becomes a place of screaming metal and trapped demons, where the boundary between machine and demon blurs completely. Their position on the Dark Council reflects their control over the Warband's most powerful weapons and their ability to keep the Warband's equipment functional despite the corrosive effects of warp exposure. Exalted champions command the Warband's elite formations, leading chosen Terminators and other veteran units into battle. These warriors have proven themselves through countless engagements, accumulating enough demonic gifts and combat experience to stand apart from standard Chaos Space Marines while remaining subordinate to the Chaos Lord. An exalted champion typically bears responsibility for training the Warband's warriors, maintaining combat readiness during periods between campaigns, and leading specific strike forces when the Chaos Lord requires multiple simultaneous operations. Their position on the Dark Council reflects their role as the Warband's primary tactical commanders, the individuals who translate the Lord's strategic vision into executable battle plans. The most successful exalted champions eventually accumulate enough power and followers to break away and form their own warbands, though this transition requires careful timing to avoid being destroyed by their former lord for premature ambition. Company organization within Chaos Warbands follows patterns established during their time as loyalist Space Marines, though corrupted by millennia of warp exposure and the specific requirements of Chaos worship. Most warbands maintain formations roughly equivalent to companies, typically numbering between 50 and 200 warriors depending on the warband's size and recent losses. These companies operate as semi-independent units capable of conducting their own raids and campaigns when the warband disperses, but they combine into a cohesive force when the Chaos Lord calls them together for major operations. Each company develops its own character over time, with warriors who have fought together for centuries forming bonds that transcend normal military discipline. A company might specialize in specific tactics, with some focusing on rapid assault while others prefer grinding siege warfare, their methods reflecting both their commanders' preferences and the accumulated experience of successful campaigns. Chosen Terminators form the Warband's most elite infantry, veterans who have survived long enough to earn tactical dreadnought armor and the respect of their peers. These warriors typically number between 5 and 20 individuals within a company-sized formation, their small numbers reflecting both the rarity of Terminator armor and the difficulty of surviving long enough to join their ranks. Chosen Terminators receive the most dangerous assignments, teleporting directly into enemy strongpoints or holding critical positions against overwhelming counterattacks. Their armor bears the marks of countless battles, covered in trophies taken from fallen enemies and inscribed with prayers to their patron deity. The mutations affecting chosen Terminators often integrate with their armor in disturbing ways, with horns growing through helmet plating or additional limbs emerging from gaps in the ceramite. These veterans maintain their own hierarchy within the Warband, with the most experienced chosen sometimes advising the Chaos Lord directly on matters of tactics and target selection. Possessed Marines represent a unique tactical asset, warriors who have allowed demonic entities to share their bodies in exchange for supernatural power. The possession process transforms these Marines into something between mortal and demon, their physical forms shifting unpredictably as the bound entity's nature bleeds through. A possessed Marine might sprout claws capable of rending through armor, develop additional limbs that strike from unexpected angles, or manifest demonic weapons that emerge directly from their flesh. The instability of their condition makes them difficult to control, as the demon's influence sometimes overwhelms the host's consciousness, turning them into berserkers who attack anything nearby. Warbands employ possessed Marines as shock troops, unleashing them against enemy positions where their unpredictable mutations and demonic strength can cause maximum disruption. Dark Apostles typically maintain control over these units through religious authority, their prayers and rituals keeping the bound demons focused on designated targets rather than running wild. Raptor units provide warbands with fast attack capabilities, their jump packs allowing them to strike from unexpected angles and pursue fleeing enemies. These warriors often develop predatory mutations that enhance their aerial combat capabilities, growing talons that replace their hands or developing enhanced vision that helps them track targets from above. The psychological profile of raptors tends toward sadism, as they particularly enjoy the terror their sudden attacks inspire in enemies. They hunt stragglers and isolated units, descending from the sky to kill with brutal efficiency before launching back into the air. The maintenance requirements for their jump packs mean raptors develop close relationships with the Warband's warpsmiths, who keep their equipment functional through a combination of mechanical expertise and demonic binding. Some raptor units modify their jump packs extensively, incorporating demon engines that provide enhanced speed and maneuverability at the cost of increased instability. Obliterators represent the ultimate fusion of Chaos Space Marine, demon, and machine, their bodies transformed into living weapons platforms. The obliterator virus that creates these entities remains poorly understood, but its effects are unmistakable. Infected warriors gradually merge with their weapons and armor, their flesh becoming metallic and their consciousness fragmenting as the virus spreads through their nervous system. An obliterator can manifest different weapons directly from their body, their arms transforming into las cannons, plasma guns, or multi-meltas as tactical requirements change. This flexibility makes them invaluable fire support, though their deteriorating mental state means they require constant direction to remain focused on appropriate targets. Warbands typically deploy obliterators in small groups, their combined firepower capable of destroying enemy armor or fortifications. The transformation into an obliterator is irreversible and progressive, with affected warriors eventually losing all traces of their original personality as the virus completes its work. Mortal followers form the bulk of many warbands fighting strength, cultists who worship the chaos gods and serve their space marine masters with fanatical devotion. These individuals come from countless worlds across the Imperium, recruited through exposure to chaos worship or captured during raids and indoctrinated into service. A typical cultist warband might include former Imperial Guard deserters who bring military training, hive gangers who contribute close combat ferocity, and corrupted planetary defense forces who provide heavy weapons expertise. The Chaos Space Marines view these mortals as expendable resources, useful for absorbing enemy fire, overwhelming positions through numerical superiority, and performing tasks beneath the dignity of transhuman warriors. Cultists understand their expendability, but accept it willingly, believing that death in service to the Chaos Gods guarantees rewards in the afterlife or transformation into something greater than their current mortal form. Recruitment of new cultists occurs through multiple methods depending on the warband's operational patterns. Some warbands maintain recruitment worlds within the Eye of Terror or other warp storms, entire planets where populations worship chaos openly and compete for the honor of serving Space Marine masters. These worlds provide steady streams of willing recruits who require minimal indoctrination, though their quality varies significantly based on local conditions. Other warbands recruit during raids on Imperial worlds, identifying individuals who show potential for corruption and transporting them back to the warband's base. The selection process emphasizes psychological factors over physical capabilities, as the warband seeks individuals whose existing beliefs or traumas make them susceptible to chaos worship. A factory worker who harbors resentment toward the Imperium's oppression, a soldier who witnessed the failure of the Imperial Creed to protect their comrades, or a noble who secretly practiced forbidden rituals, all represent ideal recruitment targets. The indoctrination process transforms recruits into useful servants through a combination of religious instruction, chemical conditioning, and exposure to warp energy. Dark Apostles lead ceremonies where new cultists swear binding oaths to their chosen chaos god, often involving self-mutilation or the sacrifice of other captives to demonstrate commitment. The recruits receive basic training in weapons use and small unit tactics, though the quality of this instruction varies dramatically between warbands. Some forces, particularly those led by former siege specialists like the Iron Warriors, conduct thorough training programs that produce competent light infantry. Others simply hand weapons to new recruits and throw them into combat, allowing natural selection to eliminate the incompetent while the survivors gain practical experience. Chemical conditioning through combat drugs and alchemical preparations helps suppress fear and increase aggression, turning ordinary humans into fanatical warriors willing to charge into enemy fire without hesitation. The hierarchies within cultist formations mirror the Chaos Space Marine command structure in simplified form. Cultist champions rise through demonstrated effectiveness in combat and the favor of their masters, commanding squads or companies of their fellow mortals. These individuals often receive minor blessings from the Chaos Gods, mutations that mark them as favored servants without transforming them into Chaos spawn. A Cornate cultist champion might develop enhanced strength and aggression, their muscles swelling beyond normal human limits. A Nurglite champion could display unnatural resilience, surviving wounds that should prove fatal through the blessings of the Plague God. These champions serve as intermediaries between the Chaos Space Marines and the mass of cultist followers, translating orders and maintaining discipline within the mortal ranks. The most successful cultist champions sometimes receive the ultimate reward of transformation into Chaos Space Marines themselves, though this process requires access to gene seed and the technical knowledge to perform the implantation surgeries, resources that many warbands lack. The reformation of the Sons of Horus into the Black Legion represents the most significant reorganization of Chaos forces since the heresy's end. The process began not with triumph, but with humiliation, as the once proud 16th Legion found itself scattered and broken following the Legion Wars. The theft of Horus's corpse by the Emperor's children triggered a spiral of vengeance killings that nearly destroyed the Sons of Horus entirely. Fabius Bile's experiments with cloning the Warmaster's genetic material deepened the wounds, creating abominations that mocked the memory of their fallen Primarch. The Legion that had led humanity's greatest rebellion became a laughingstock among the other traitor legions, their warriors hunted through the Eye of Terror by those who blamed them for the heresy's failure. Abaddon the Despoiler emerged from this crucible with a vision that rejected everything his gene father represented. Where Horus had sought to replace the Emperor, Abaddon wanted only destruction. Where Horus had negotiated with the Chaos Gods as supplicants, Abaddon demanded they serve his purposes. The moment of transformation came when Abaddon led a strike force to recover a demon sword from a chaos-corrupted space Hulk, claiming the blade that would become Drachnian. This weapon, a greater demon of chaos undivided bound into sword form during the Horus heresy itself, recognized Abaddon's strength of will and bound itself to him. Armed with this weapon and his determination to forge a new identity, Abaddon gathered the scattered remnants of the Sons of Horus and issued an ultimatum. They would abandon their past, cast off the colors and heraldry that marked them as Horus's failures, and become something new. Those who refused died by Abaddon's hand or fled to join other warbands. The adoption of black armor served multiple symbolic purposes. It represented the death of the old legion and the birth of something darker. It allowed warriors from other legions to join without abandoning their identities entirely, as the black provided a unifying base that accommodated individual heraldry and markings. Most importantly, it demonstrated Abaddon's rejection of his Primarch's legacy. The Sons of Horus had worn sea green armor decorated with the Eye of Horus, proclaiming their allegiance to their gene father with every battle. The Black Legion wore the colors of the Void itself, acknowledging no master but Abaddon and no goal but the Imperium's annihilation. The Ezekarian formed the core of Abaddon's new legion, a brotherhood of champions who represented different aspects of the Black Legion's power and philosophy. These warriors came from various legions and backgrounds, united by their commitment to Abaddon's vision rather than shared genetic heritage. Iskandar Khayan, a thousand-suns sorcerer, brought psychic expertise and a unique perspective shaped by his legion's tragic history. His mastery of summoning and binding demons provided the Black Legion with capabilities that purely martial warriors could not match. Khayan's presence in the Azakarian demonstrated Abaddon's willingness to accept warriors from any legion if they proved their worth and loyalty. The sorcerer's writings, later recovered by Imperial forces, provide some of the most detailed accounts of the Black Legion's formation and early campaigns, though their accuracy remains disputed given the author's obvious bias and the distorting effects of warp exposure on memory. Telemachus Lyras, formerly of the Emperor's Children, exemplified the Black Legion's approach to incorporating warriors dedicated to specific chaos gods. His devotion to Slaanesh remained absolute, his combat style reflecting the Dark Prince's emphasis on perfection and excess. Yet Telemachus served Abaddon's strategic vision without allowing his religious devotion to compromise operational effectiveness. He commanded the Black Legion's noise marine contingents, integrating sonic weaponry and the Emperor's Children's refined close combat techniques into the larger force structure. His presence proved that warriors could maintain their god-specific worship while contributing to Abaddon's undivided approach, as long as they prioritized the long war above their patron deity's immediate demands. Falcus Kibber, called the Widowmaker, represented continuity with the Sons of Horus's martial traditions while embracing the new identity. He had served as a company captain during the heresy, leading Terminators in some of the most brutal boarding actions and siege assaults. His expertise in Terminator tactics and void warfare made him invaluable during the Black Legion's early campaigns, which often involved ship-to-ship combat and the seizure of strategic assets within the Eye of Terror. Kibber commanded the Justarin, the Black Legion's elite Terminator formation that consciously echoed the Sons of Horus's first company while establishing new traditions. The Justarin's black Terminator plate, decorated with skulls and chains, became one of the Black Legion's most recognizable symbols, their presence on the battlefield signaling that Abaddon had committed his best warriors to the engagement. The other members of the Azakarian each brought specialized capabilities that rounded out the Black Legion's leadership. Vortigern served as Abaddon's principal lieutenant, coordinating operations when the War Master's attention focused elsewhere. Ashur Kai provided additional sorceress expertise, his approach complementing Khayan's methods and ensuring the Black Legion maintained redundant psychic capabilities. Liorvan Ukris, called Firefist, commanded the Legion's assault forces, his aggressive tactics and Terminator armored bulk making him ideal for leading breakthrough attacks. These champions formed a council that advised Abaddon while commanding major formations within the Black Legion, their diverse backgrounds and specializations reflecting the Warbands' inclusive recruitment philosophy. The Black Crusades represent Abaddon's most significant contribution to the Long War, campaigns that transformed chaos strategy from reactive raiding to coordinated grand offensives. Each crusade pursued specific objectives that served Abaddon's overarching plan to destroy the Imperium, though Imperial observers often misunderstood their true purposes by focusing on surface-level outcomes rather than strategic achievements. The First Black Crusade launched from the Eye of Terror in the early 31st millennium, targeting the Ark's Gap and establishing the Black Legion's capability to project force beyond the Warp Storm's boundaries. The campaign secured multiple fortress worlds and demon forges that would supply future crusades, while demonstrating to the other Traitor Legions that Abaddon commanded sufficient strength to threaten the Imperium directly. The Second Black Crusade struck at the world of Belize Corona, a campaign that appeared to end in failure when Imperial forces repelled the invasion. However, Abaddon's actual objective involved acquiring specific artifacts and gene seed stocks from the planet's vaults, goals he achieved before withdrawing. This pattern repeated throughout many of the Black Crusades, with Abaddon accepting tactical defeats that masked strategic victories. Imperial commanders celebrated their successful defenses without realizing they had been manipulated into defending the wrong objectives, while Abaddon's forces accomplished their true missions elsewhere. The Sixth Black Crusade targeted the Gothic sector, a campaign that lasted decades and nearly succeeded in capturing the sector's Blackstone fortresses. These ancient space stations, built by unknown Xenos during the War in Heaven, possessed reality warping capabilities that could devastate entire fleets or planetary systems. Abaddon recognized their potential as weapons against the Imperium and tools for expanding the Eye of Terror's boundaries. Though he ultimately secured only 2 of the 6 Blackstone fortresses, their acquisition provided the Black Legion with strategic weapons of immense power. The destruction of one fortress above the world of Fularis demonstrated their capabilities, as the station's systems tore apart both the planet and the Imperial fleet defending it. The 13th Black Crusade, launched in the closing years of the 41st millennium, represented the culmination of Abaddon's 10,000-year strategy. The campaign focused on the Cadian Gate, the most stable route out of the Eye of Terror, and the linchpin of Imperial defenses in the region. Cadia itself had stood as a fortress world for millennia, its population bred for war and its defenses layered so deeply that conventional assault seemed impossible. Abaddon committed the full strength of the Black Legion and called upon every allied warband, Demon Legion, and Dark Mechanicum Forge to support the offensive. The fighting on Cadia's surface lasted for years, with neither side able to achieve decisive victory through conventional military means. Abaddon's solution demonstrated his willingness to sacrifice anything to achieve his objectives. He directed one of the captured Blackstone fortresses to ram Cadia itself, the station's destruction triggering a cataclysm that shattered the planet's structure and destabilized the pylons that had kept the Eye of Terror contained. The resulting warp storms expanded dramatically, creating the Great Rift that split the Imperium in half. From Abaddon's perspective, the campaign succeeded completely. Cadia's destruction eliminated the primary obstacle to chaos expansion. The Great Rift provided access to previously secure Imperial sectors, and the Imperium faced strategic challenges that would occupy their forces for centuries. The loss of the Blackstone Fortress and millions of Chaos Warriors meant nothing compared to these achievements. The Black Legion's recruitment practices distinguish it from other Chaos Warbands through systematic absorption of warriors from across the galaxy. Where most warbands grow through internal recruitment or small-scale defections, the Black Legion actively seeks out and incorporates entire warbands, companies, and individual champions who demonstrate exceptional capabilities. This process begins with identification of potential recruits, either through direct observation during joint campaigns or through the Black Legion's network of informants and allied forces. A warband that performs well during a Black Crusade might receive an invitation to join the Legion permanently. Their leader offered a position of authority within the larger structure in exchange for swearing loyalty to Abaddon. The assimilation process varies based on the recruit's background and the circumstances of their joining. Warriors from other Traitor Legions typically maintain some elements of their original heraldry even after adopting black armor, with shoulder pads or trim in their Legion's colors marking their heritage. A former World Eater might display white and blue alongside the dominant black, while an ex-Emperor's child could incorporate purple and gold accents. This accommodation of diverse backgrounds creates a force where individual squads display remarkable visual variety despite their unified black color scheme. The practice serves practical purposes beyond symbolism, as it allows the Black Legion to leverage the specialized combat doctrines and techniques that warriors learned in their original legions. Renegade Space Marines from Loyalist chapters face more intensive scrutiny during recruitment, as their recent service to the Imperium makes them potential security risks. These individuals must prove their commitment through actions rather than words, typically by participating in particularly brutal operations or completing tasks that make reconciliation with the Imperium impossible. A former Ultramarine who seeks to join the Black Legion might be required to lead an assault on one of his chapter's successor forces, killing his former brothers to demonstrate his new allegiance. The psychological trauma of these initiation requirements serves dual purposes, breaking the recruits' remaining ties to their past while testing their determination to embrace their new identity. The Black Legion's size makes it the largest single Chaos force in the galaxy, with estimates suggesting it numbers between 10 and 20,000 Chaos Space Marines, supported by millions of cultists and countless demon-bound war engines. This scale allows Abaddon to conduct simultaneous operations across multiple sectors, projecting power in ways that smaller warbands cannot match. The Legion's structure accommodates this size through a modified company system, where individual formations maintain considerable operational autonomy while responding to strategic direction from Abaddon and the Ezekarian. A Black Legion company might conduct independent raids for years between major crusades, supporting itself through plunder and local recruitment while maintaining readiness to answer Abaddon's summons. The diversity within Black Legion ranks creates both advantages and challenges for command and control. Squads that include former World Eaters, Thousand Suns, and Death Guard bring vastly different combat styles and tactical preferences to the battlefield. A single company might field Khorne Berserkers alongside Plague Marines and Rubric Marines, their varied capabilities providing flexibility that mono-god warbands lack. However, coordinating these diverse forces requires sophisticated command structures and leaders capable of understanding and leveraging each unit's strengths. The Black Legion's officers typically possess extensive experience working with warriors from multiple legions, their expertise in combined arms warfare reflecting decades or centuries of commanding heterogeneous forces. The Black Legion's fleet assets rival those of entire Imperial sectors, with dozens of capital ships and hundreds of escorts operating from bases throughout the Eye of Terror and other warp storms. The Vengeful Spirit, Horus's former flagship, serves as Abaddon's mobile fortress and the Black Legion's most potent symbol. The vessel's corruption during the heresy transformed it into something between warship and demon engine, its systems responding to Abaddon's will as much as to crew commands. Other notable vessels include the Planet Killer, a massive warship equipped with an Armageddon gun capable of destroying worlds, and the Despoiler-class battleships that serve as flagships for major Black Legion formations. The fleet's size and capabilities allow the Black Legion to conduct void warfare on scales that smaller warbands cannot match, blockading entire systems or engaging Imperial Navy battle groups in direct combat. The Black Legion maintains multiple fortress worlds and bases throughout the Eye of Terror, with the largest concentration centered on the Demon World claimed by Abaddon as his primary stronghold. These bases provide recruitment facilities, training grounds, and manufacturing capability that support the Legion's operations across the galaxy. The Demon Forges produce ammunition, replacement armor components, and new weapons using techniques that combine dark mechanicum knowledge with demonic binding rituals. Slave populations captured during raids provide labor for these facilities, their lives consumed in the production of war materiel that fuels the long war. The most valuable bases include gene seed repositories, where captured progenitor glands are stored and processed, allowing the Black Legion to create new Chaos Space Marines from suitable recruits. Luft Huron's transformation from the chapter master of the Astral Claws into Huron Blackheart, the Tyrant of Badab, represents one of the most thoroughly documented falls to chaos in Imperial history. The Badab War's origins lay in legitimate concerns about the Imperium's failure to adequately support the Maelstrom Warders, the collection of chapters tasked with containing the warp storm that threatened the Badab sector. Huron recognized that the Imperium's bureaucratic inefficiency and the vast distances between Terra and the Maelstrom meant that his forces operated with minimal support while facing constant threats from Chaos Raiders emerging from the storm. His solution involved creating a self-sufficient power base within the Badab sector, levying tithes from local worlds to fund his operations, and gradually accumulating military strength that exceeded what a single chapter should possess. The accumulation of power proceeded incrementally over decades, with Huron establishing control over the Badab sector's industrial capacity and recruiting beyond the Codex Astartes limits. He justified these actions as necessary responses to the Maelstrom's threat, arguing that rigid adherence to regulations designed for stable sectors made no sense when facing constant chaos incursions. The Astral Claw's numbers swelled beyond 1,000 warriors, with some estimates suggesting they reached nearly 3,000 before the Inquisition intervened. Huron's charisma and tactical brilliance attracted support from other chapters in the region, particularly the Mantis warriors, executioners, and lamenters, who shared his frustrations with imperial bureaucracy and recognized the practical benefits of his approach. The conflict escalated when the Administratum demanded back tithes from worlds Huron had claimed as part of his defensive network, and the Inquisition questioned his authority to levy taxes without proper authorization. Huron's refusal to submit to inquisitorial investigation transformed a political dispute into open rebellion. He declared the Badab sector independent, establishing the Maelstrom Warders Alliance as a separate military power that would defend the region without interference from distant Terra. The Imperium's response came slowly, hampered by the same bureaucratic inefficiency that had created the crisis, but when it arrived, it brought overwhelming force. Multiple Space Marine chapters received orders to bring the rebels to compliance, including the Marines Errant, Minotaurs, Karkarodans, and Fire Hawks. The war lasted nearly a decade, with fighting spreading across dozens of worlds throughout the Badab sector. The Astral Claws fought with the skill and determination expected of Space Marines, their fortifications on Badab Primaris proving nearly impregnable to conventional assault. Huron demonstrated exceptional strategic ability, using the sector's geography and his knowledge of local conditions to offset the Loyalists' numerical superiority. His forces conducted raids against supply lines, ambushed isolated Loyalist formations, and leveraged their control of local populations to gather intelligence on enemy movements. The other rebel chapters contributed their own specialties, with the Mantis warriors' stealth capabilities and the Executioner's assault expertise complementing the Astral Claw's defensive strength. The turning point came when Huron's desperation drove him to increasingly extreme measures. The war's grinding attrition depleted his forces faster than he could replace them, even with accelerated recruitment programs that violated every principle of proper gene seed implantation. He began employing forbidden technologies recovered from the Maelstrom, weapons and equipment tainted by chaos that offered immediate power at the cost of corruption. The exact moment when Huron crossed the line from renegade to heretic remains unclear, but evidence suggests he made pacts with entities from the Maelstrom in exchange for reinforcements and knowledge that might turn the war's tide. These deals corrupted him gradually, each compromise making the next easier, until he had fully embraced chaos as a tool for survival and victory. The final assault on Badab Primaris brought together the full strength of the Loyalist forces, their patience with siege warfare exhausted. The Karkarodans led boarding actions against the orbital defenses, while the Minotaurs conducted ground assaults with characteristic brutality. The palace fortress where Huron commanded his forces became the focus of the heaviest fighting, with Loyalist Terminators pushing through corridors filled with the bodies of both sides. Huron fought personally in the fortress's defense, his skills as a warrior matching his strategic abilities. The confrontation with Loyalist champions left him catastrophically injured, with much of his body burned or torn apart by bolter fire and power weapons. Only his Artificer armor's life support systems and emergency augmetics kept him alive long enough for his remaining warriors to evacuate him from the dying fortress. The retreat into the Maelstrom saved what remained of the Astral Claws and their allied forces, but it completed Huron's transformation into something no longer recognizably human. The injuries he sustained required extensive augmentation far beyond standard Space Marine capabilities. His left side was almost entirely replaced with cybernetics, creating a fusion of flesh and machine that earned him the name Blackheart. A massive mechanical claw replaced his left arm, its servo motors capable of crushing ceramite armor. His face became a grotesque mixture of scarred flesh and metal plating, with bionic eyes that glowed with malevolent intelligence. The life support systems integrated into his torso gave him a hunched appearance, tubes and cables connecting various augmetic components in configurations that seemed designed more for intimidation than efficiency. The transformation extended beyond physical reconstruction. the Maelstrom's energies, and the demonic pacts Huron had made during the war's final stages corrupted him at a fundamental level. He emerged from his recovery period as a true Chaos Lord, his remaining humanity buried beneath layers of bitterness, rage, and ambition. The astral claws who followed him into the Maelstrom underwent similar transformations, their gene seed corruption accelerating in the Warp Storm's reality warping environment. They discarded their old heraldry and adopted the red and black colors that would mark them as the Red Corsairs, pirates who would plague the Imperium for millennia. The establishment of New Badab within the Maelstrom provided the Red Corsairs with a fortress world that rivaled anything the Traitor Legions controlled within the Eye of Terror. Huron claimed a demon world deep within the Warp Storm, reshaping it through a combination of military conquest and sorcerous ritual. The world's surface became covered with fortifications that combined Imperial military architecture with chaos-corrupted additions, gun emplacements, and void shield generators, standing alongside temples where dark rituals invoked the ruinous powers. The fortress palace at the world's primary hive became Huron's seat of power, a sprawling complex where he commanded his growing empire of pirates and renegades. New Badab's strategic location within the Maelstrom gave the Red Corsairs access to multiple routes into Imperial space, with warp currents allowing rapid transit to sectors across the Segmentum Obscurus and beyond. Huron exploited this advantage ruthlessly, establishing the Red Corsairs as the dominant chaos force operating from the Maelstrom. His control extended to other worlds within the Warp Storm, demon-held planets and corrupted Imperial colonies that provided resources, recruitment pools, and forward bases for raiding operations. The tribute system he imposed on these subordinate holdings funneled wealth and materiel to New Badab, supporting the massive fleet and army that made the Red Corsairs a threat comparable to the Black Legion itself. The Red Corsairs' approach to chaos worship differs markedly from the religious devotion practiced by warbands like the Word Bearers or the single-minded dedication of cult troops. Huron maintains pragmatic relationships with all four chaos gods, accepting their gifts when useful, but refusing to bind himself exclusively to any single patron. This flexibility attracts renegades who seek power and freedom rather than spiritual enlightenment or demonic ascension. A space marine who turns from the Emperor's light because he desires independence from the Imperium's restrictions finds the Red Corsairs more appealing than warbands that demand absolute devotion to specific deities. The Corsairs offer a path where chaos serves as a tool rather than a master, where warriors can accumulate power and influence without surrendering their autonomy to demonic entities. This pragmatic philosophy extends to the Red Corsairs' operational methods. Where other Chaos warbands conduct raids primarily to gather slaves for sacrifice or spread their patron god's influence, the Red Corsairs focus on material gain. Their targets are selected based on potential plunder rather than symbolic or religious significance. A Red Corsair fleet might bypass a heavily defended shrine world to strike at a lightly protected forge world, prioritizing the acquisition of weapons and equipment over the satisfaction of destroying Imperial faith. Gene Seed represents their most valued prize, as Huron's expansion plans require constant recruitment of new Chaos Space Marines. Raids frequently target Space Marine chapter facilities, with the Corsairs willing to accept heavy casualties if success means capturing progenid glands that can create new warriors. The fleet assets under Huron's command rival those of the Black Legion in both size and capability. Dozens of capital ships operate from New Badab and subsidiary bases throughout the Maelstrom, ranging from ancient vessels dating to the Great Crusade to recently captured Imperial Navy warships. The fleet's composition reflects the Red Corsairs' piratical nature, with fast strike cruisers and raiders outnumbering the heavy battleships that other Chaos forces favor. These vessels conduct independent operations across vast stretches of Imperial space, their captains granted considerable autonomy as long as they meet their tribute obligations to Huron. The tribute system requires each captain to deliver a portion of their plunder to New Badab, with the specific percentages varying based on the captain's rank and the resources required for their operations. The Blood Reaver clans form the core of the Red Corsairs' military structure, elite formations that serve as Huron's personal enforcers and the most reliable units in his army. These warriors have proven their loyalty through years of service and demonstrated exceptional combat effectiveness across multiple campaigns. Blood Reaver status comes with significant privileges, including first choice of captured equipment, better quarters on New Badab, and command positions within the larger warband. The clans maintain their own internal hierarchies, with veteran Blood Reavers commanding squads of less experienced Corsairs and newly recruited renegades. Competition between clans drives them to ever greater achievements, each seeking to outdo their rivals in the scale and audacity of their raids. Subordinate warbands operating under Huron's banner provide the Red Corsairs with additional strength and operational flexibility. These groups maintain their own identities and leadership structures, while acknowledging Huron's overall authority and paying tribute from their raids. A smaller warband that joins the Red Corsairs gains access to the organization's resources, including repair facilities, ammunition supplies, and intelligence about potential targets. In exchange, they accept assignments from Huron when he requires additional forces for major operations, and contribute a portion of their plunder to the central treasury on New Badab. This arrangement attracts warbands that lack the strength to operate independently, but resist full absorption into larger organizations, allowing them to maintain their autonomy while benefiting from the Red Corsairs' infrastructure. The delegation of raiding territories prevents conflicts between subordinate warbands and ensures comprehensive coverage of potential targets throughout Imperial space. Huron assigns specific sectors or regions to individual captains and warbands, granting them exclusive rights to conduct operations within those areas. A Blood Reaver captain might receive responsibility for raiding the Agrippina sector, while a subordinate warband operates in the Gothic sector. These assignments rotate periodically based on performance and changing strategic priorities, with successful raiders earning rights to more lucrative territories, while those who fail to meet tribute requirements find themselves assigned to dangerous or depleted regions. The system creates internal competition that drives operational tempo while preventing the self-destructive infighting that plagues less organized chaos forces. Enforcement of the tribute system requires constant vigilance and occasional displays of overwhelming force. Huron maintains a network of informants and observers who monitor subordinate warbands' activities, tracking their raids and verifying that tribute payments match actual plunder acquired. Captains who attempt to hide resources or underreport their gains face immediate punishment ranging from loss of territory to execution. The tyrant's reputation for brutal retribution against those who defy his authority keeps most subordinates honest, though ambitious captains occasionally test the boundaries of acceptable behavior. When Huron discovers significant violations, he dispatches Blood Reaver strike forces to make examples of the offenders, their deaths serving as warnings to others who might consider similar treachery. The Red Corsairs' recruitment practices focus on absorbing renegade space marines from loyalist chapters, a strategy that provides fully trained warriors without the time investment required to create new Chaos Space Marines from baseline humans. Huron actively seeks out Marines who have turned from the Emperor's light, offering them sanctuary within the Maelstrom and positions within his growing empire. These recruitment efforts target several categories of potential converts. Space Marines who survive the destruction of their chapters find themselves without purpose or support, making them vulnerable to offers of new brotherhood and continued warfare. Warriors who commit crimes or violate their chapter's codes face execution or penitence crusades that amount to suicide missions, giving them powerful incentives to flee into chaos territory before judgment falls. Marines who develop ideological disagreements with their chapter's leadership or the Imperium's policies sometimes choose voluntary exile rather than continue serving causes they no longer believe in. The indoctrination process for new recruits varies based on their circumstances and psychological state. Recent renegades who fled the Imperium within the past few years require extensive conditioning to break their remaining loyalty to the Emperor and their former chapters. The Red Corsairs employ a combination of psychological manipulation, exposure to chaos philosophy, and gradual corruption through warp energy to transform these individuals into reliable servants. Veterans who have operated as renegades for extended periods need less intensive processing, their existing separation from imperial ideology making them more receptive to full chaos allegiance. The most valuable recruits are those who bring specialized skills or knowledge with them, such as tech marines who understand advanced equipment maintenance, or librarians whose psychic abilities enhance the Red Corsair's sorceress capabilities. The integration of diverse chapter cultures within the Red Corsairs creates a force with remarkable tactical flexibility. A single strike force might include former Ultramarines who bring their chapter's methodical approach to warfare, ex-Space Wolves who contribute close combat ferocity, and renegade Dark Angels whose secretive nature suits infiltration operations. This diversity allows Huron to adapt his force's tactics to specific mission requirements, assembling teams with the exact combination of skills needed for particular objectives. The mixing of different combat doctrines also creates opportunities for innovation, as warriors from various backgrounds share techniques and develop hybrid approaches that combine the best elements of multiple chapters' traditions. The Red Corsairs maintain extensive facilities for processing captured gene seed and creating new Chaos Space Marines, an investment that distinguishes them from many smaller warbands that lack the resources or knowledge for large-scale recruitment. The apothecarian complexes on new Badab house banks of stolen progenid glands, carefully cataloged by genetic origin and quality. Huron's chaos-corrupted apothecaries oversee implantation procedures that combine traditional Space Marine creation techniques with shortcuts and enhancements drawn from dark mechanicum research. These accelerated processes produce functional Chaos Space Marines in a fraction of the time required by Loyalist chapters, though the recipients often suffer higher mutation rates and psychological instability. The scale of these operations allows the Red Corsairs to replace losses and expand their numbers at rates that would be impossible through conventional recruitment alone. Human cultist populations support the Red Corsairs' operations in roles ranging from ship crews to garrison forces for captured worlds. These mortals come from diverse backgrounds, including captured Imperial citizens, inhabitants of Maelstrom worlds, and volunteers who seek the power and freedom that service to Chaos promises. The cultists receive better treatment than those serving most other Chaos warbands, as Huron recognizes their value and understands that maintaining morale among mortal followers improves their effectiveness. Cultist champions who demonstrate exceptional ability sometimes receive consideration for transformation into Chaos Space Marines, though the process requires suitable genetic compatibility and access to appropriate gene seed. This possibility of advancement creates genuine loyalty among the most capable cultists, who see service to the Red Corsairs as a path to transhuman power rather than mere survival. The Red Corsairs' growing strength attracts attention from both Imperial forces and rival Chaos warbands. The Imperium has launched multiple crusades aimed at destroying New Badab and eliminating Huron's threat, though the Maelstrom's treacherous nature and the Red Corsairs' defensive preparations have defeated these efforts. Space Marine chapters that lost brothers to the Red Corsairs' recruitment raids harbor particular hatred for Huron's forces, viewing them as traitors who corrupt loyal warriors and desecrate the gene seed of the Emperor's chosen. These chapters sometimes conduct their own operations into the Maelstrom, seeking to recover lost gene seed or rescue captured brothers before their corruption becomes irreversible. Competition with other major Chaos forces creates additional complications for the Red Corsairs' expansion. The Black Legion views Huron's growing power with suspicion, concerned that the Tyrant of Badab might eventually challenge Abaddon's position as the preeminent Chaos warlord. Abaddon has attempted to bring the Red Corsairs under his authority, offering Huron subordinate command positions within the Black Legion structure during major campaigns. Huron accepts these arrangements when they serve his interests, but maintains his independence, refusing to acknowledge Abaddon as his superior. This tension occasionally erupts into open conflict when Red Corsair and Black Legion forces compete for the same objectives or resources, though both sides generally avoid escalation that might weaken Chaos forces overall. The alliance between Chaos Warbands and the Dark Mechanicum represents one of the most dangerous partnerships forged in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy. When the Traitor Legions fled into the Eye of Terror, they brought with them thousands of tech priests who had rejected the Omnissiah's teachings in favor of the machine god's darker aspects. These corrupted adepts established forge complexes within the warp storms, their knowledge of imperial technology combining with demonic binding rituals to produce weapons that blur the distinction between machine and living entity. The relationship functions as mutual exploitation rather than genuine cooperation. Warbands require the Dark Mechanicum's manufacturing capabilities to maintain their equipment and produce the specialized war engines that give them advantages over Imperial forces. The tech priests gain test subjects for their experiments, raw materials harvested from raided worlds, and protection from rivals who might covet their facilities. The forges themselves exist as nightmarish parodies of Imperial manufactorums, their production lines staffed by slaves whose bodies have been augmented with crude cybernetics that allow them to work until their flesh fails completely. Conveyor systems carry components through chambers where the temperature exceeds human tolerance, the heat necessary for forging the blessed metals that will house demonic essences. Vast summoning circles occupy central positions within each forge complex, their inscriptions maintained by choirs of cultists who chant continuously to keep the barriers between real space and the warp thin enough for demon binding, but stable enough to prevent catastrophic breaches. The tech priests who oversee these operations bear mutations that reflect their patron's nature, with excess mechadendrites sprouting from their bodies in configurations that serve no practical purpose or flesh merging with their augmetics in ways that suggest Nurgle's influence. The creation of demon engines begins with the construction of a mechanical shell designed to house and channel a never-born entity's power. Dark Mechanicum adepts design these chassis using principles that violate every tenet of the Adeptus Mechanicus's sacred patterns. Where Imperial vehicles incorporate machine spirits that require appeasement through ritual and maintenance, demon engines receive frameworks specifically built to constrain entities that actively resist their imprisonment. The Defiler's basic structure combines elements from multiple vehicle classes, with the lower chassis resembling a Predator tank's hull, while the upper sections support a mechanical body that stands on 4 articulated legs. This hybrid design allows the completed engine to navigate terrain impossible for tracked vehicles, while maintaining the armor protection and weapon mounts of a battle tank. The mechanical components undergo preparation rituals before demon binding begins. Tech priests inscribe every surface with microscopic runes that form containment patterns, each symbol placed with precision measured in microns. The slightest error in these inscriptions creates weaknesses that the demon will exploit, potentially breaking free during the binding process or sabotaging the engine systems once operational. The weapon systems receive particular attention, as they must channel the demon's rage into directed violence against designated targets rather than indiscriminate destruction. A Defiler's battle cannon requires internal mechanisms that focus the bound demon's hatred through the barrel, transforming its malevolence into physical projectiles that carry fragments of warp energy alongside conventional explosive payloads. The binding ritual itself demands resources and expertise that only the largest forge complexes possess. The mechanical shell occupies the center of a summoning circle, while tech priests and sorcerers coordinate their efforts to call forth a demon of appropriate power. The entity's nature must match the engine's intended purpose. Bloodletters or other cornate demons suit assault-focused engines that will charge into enemy formations, their inherent aggression channeled through the machine's weapon systems. Plaguebearers work well for engines intended to spread disease and despair, their resilience translating into enhanced durability for the completed vehicle. The summoning process takes hours or days depending on the demon's strength and the warp's current stability, with the participants maintaining their concentration despite the entity's attempts to break free and slaughter them. The critical moment arrives when the demon manifests fully within the summoning circle, and the binding chains activate. These are not physical restraints, but rather psychic constructs reinforced by the mechanical shell's containment runes. The demon fights the binding with every fragment of its essence, seeking any weakness in the patterns that confine it. Tech priests monitor the process through auspex, arrays that measure warp energy fluctuations, adjusting the binding chain's strength to compensate for the demon's resistance. Sorcerers channel additional power into the containment patterns when the demon's struggles threaten to overwhelm the initial preparations. The shell's armor plates seal shut once the demon is fully bound, their locking mechanisms incorporating both mechanical bolts and sorceress wards that prevent the entity from forcing its way out. The completed demon engine possesses capabilities that conventional vehicles cannot match. A defiler moves with predatory intelligence, its demon pilot analyzing battlefield conditions and selecting targets based on tactical value rather than simple programming. The legs adapt to terrain in real time, finding purchase on surfaces where tracked vehicles would bog down and adjusting their gait to maintain stability during movement. The weapons fire with accuracy enhanced by the demon's supernatural awareness, its targeting solutions incorporating information that mundane sensors cannot detect. The battle cannon's shells carry warp-tainted explosives that corrupt whatever they touch, leaving craters where reality itself has been damaged. The Reaper autocannon mounted alongside the main gun spits rounds that home in on targets with minimal guidance, the ammunition itself touched by demonic intelligence. Mauler Fiends represent a different approach to demon engine construction, their design prioritizing close combat capability over ranged firepower. The chassis resembles a mechanical beast built for speed and violence, with a hunched body supported by two powerful legs and arms that end in massive siege claws or lasher tendrils. The binding process for Mauler Fiends typically employs demons with strong predatory instincts, entities that relish the act of tearing enemies apart rather than killing from distance. Cornate demons suit this role particularly well, their bloodlust channeled through the engine's assault systems to create a war machine that charges toward enemy lines with single-minded determination. The Mauler Fiend siege claws incorporate power field generators that allow them to shear through armor plating and fortification walls, their cutting edges vibrating at frequencies that disrupt molecular bonds. The demon bound within the engine adds supernatural strength to these physical cutting tools, allowing a Mauler Fiend to tear apart vehicles or collapse bunkers through a combination of mechanical force and warp energy. The Lasher Tendril variant sacrifices some armor-penetrating capability for increased reach and flexibility, its whip-like appendages capable of striking multiple targets or wrapping around enemies to crush them. These tendrils respond to the demon's will with serpentine fluidity, their movements too fast and unpredictable for human reflexes to track effectively. Helldrakes exemplify the Dark Mechanicum's most ambitious demon engine projects, aerial units that combine aircraft performance with demonic possession. The base airframe derives from Stormtalon and Thunderhawk designs, but the Dark Mechanicum's modifications transform these recognizable patterns into something alien. The fuselage stretches and warps during construction, its dimensions expanding beyond what aerodynamics should permit. Wings sprout from the chassis in configurations that violate principles of atmospheric flight, yet the completed engine flies with agility that surpasses Imperial aircraft. The transformation occurs because the Helldrake does not rely purely on mechanical thrust and lift. The bound demon supplements the physical systems with warp-derived propulsion, allowing the engine to maneuver in ways that would tear apart conventional aircraft. The binding ritual for Helldrakes presents unique challenges because aerial demon engines require demons with appropriate predatory instincts and the intelligence to operate in three-dimensional combat environments. Slaaneshi demons sometimes suit this role despite their association with ground-based excess, as their pursuit of perfect movement translates well to aerial combat. The demon's essence spreads throughout the airframe during binding, with particular concentrations in the wing structures and propulsion systems, where its influence most directly affects flight characteristics. The weapon's integration follows similar patterns to other demon engines, with the Helldrake's Hades auto-cannon or Baleflamer receiving modifications that allow the bound demon to enhance their effectiveness through direct manipulation of targeting systems and ammunition feeds. The completed Helldrake hunts with intelligence that conventional aircraft cannot match. It selects targets based on tactical priority and vulnerability rather than simple proximity, diving on exposed infantry formations or isolated vehicles where its weapons achieve maximum effect. The Baleflamer variant proves particularly devastating against clustered enemies, its promethium mixture carrying demonic taint that causes wounds to resist healing and corrupts those who survive the initial burning. The Hades auto-cannon configuration trades area effect for armor penetration, its shells capable of damaging light vehicles and punching through power armor with sustained fire. The Helldrake's most terrifying capability emerges during close passes over enemy formations, when the demon's presence alone causes psychological damage that breaks unit cohesion and sends survivors fleeing in panic. The Iron Warriors maintain the closest relationships with Dark Mechanicum forges, their warpsmiths serving as intermediaries who understand both the mechanical principles of demon engine construction and the sorcerous rituals required for binding. These specialists occupy crucial positions within Iron Warriors' grand companies, their expertise making them indispensable despite the suspicion that their dual nature generates among more purely martial warriors. A warpsmith's training begins with standard Techmarine education in Imperial Forge worlds or aboard Legion vessels, learning the sacred patterns and maintenance rituals that keep Space Marine equipment functional. The transition to warpsmith occurs when this technical knowledge combines with sorceress study, the aspirant learning to perceive the warp currents that flow through all matter and the techniques for channeling demonic essence into mechanical systems. The physical transformation that accompanies warpsmith training produces individuals who appear as much machine as flesh. Mechadendrites sprout from their backs and shoulders in greater profusion than standard Techmarines possess, each appendage specialized for specific tasks ranging from precision welding to heavy lifting. These additional limbs often incorporate demonic elements, their movements guided by bound lesser demons or fragments of larger entities that provide enhanced dexterity and strength. The warpsmith's armor integrates with their augmetics so completely that removing the ceramite would require removing significant portions of their body, the two having fused during years of warp exposure and deliberate modification. Their weapons typically include meltaguns or plasma weapons for dealing with enemy armor, but many warpsmiths also carry power axes or thunder hammers that serve as both tools and close combat weapons. The mechanized companies within Iron Warriors' grand companies field demon engines in concentrations that other warbands cannot match. These formations include multiple defilers supported by Maulerfiend packs and Forgifiend fire support platforms, their combined firepower capable of reducing fortifications to rubble, while the assault engines tear through any defenders who survive the bombardment. The Iron Warriors employ these mechanized forces with the same methodical precision that characterizes all their operations, coordinating demon engine attacks with infantry advances and artillery strikes to create overwhelming combined arms assaults. The warpsmiths who command these companies maintain direct control over their demon engines through a combination of traditional command protocols and sorceress links that allow them to sense the bound demon's status and intentions. The Forge of Souls on Medrengard represents the largest and most productive demon forge in existence, its output rivaling entire forge worlds within the Imperium. Perdurabo claimed Medrengard as his fortress world after the heresy, transforming its surface into a nightmare of fortifications and industrial complexes that produce weapons for Iron Warriors' forces and any other warbands willing to meet the required payment. The Forge of Souls occupies a massive crater that was once an impact site from the world's ancient wars, its walls rising kilometers above the surrounding terrain while its depths extend equally far below the surface. The forge's production capacity stems from its access to raw materials harvested from across the Eye of Terror and its massive slave population, millions of captives whose lives are consumed in the endless production cycles. The payment structure for accessing the Forge of Souls services varies based on the items requested and the customer's relationship with the Iron Warriors. Standard ammunition and replacement parts require relatively modest payments in raw materials or slaves, resources that any successful warband can provide through regular raiding. Demon engines demand significantly higher costs, with the Forge of Souls requiring not just materials, but also suitable demons for binding, or the psychic energy generated by mass sacrifices. The most powerful weapons and customized equipment carry prices measured in souls rather than physical currency, with the customer required to deliver specific individuals whose deaths or corruption will please the Forge's demonic patrons. The quality of items produced by the Forge of Souls exceeds what most other demon forges can achieve, the result of millennia of refinement and access to knowledge preserved from the Great Crusade era. Weapons manufactured in these facilities incorporate design elements from the Dark Age of technology, patterns that the Adeptus Mechanicus has forgotten or deliberately suppressed. A bolter produced on Medrengard fires with greater accuracy and reliability than standard patterns. Its internal mechanisms optimized through techniques that combine engineering excellence with demonic enhancement. Power armor forged in the Forge of Souls provides superior protection while remaining lighter than equivalent Imperial patterns, the ceramite having been treated with alchemical processes that increase its molecular density without adding mass. Other significant demon forges operate throughout the Eye of Terror and within the Maelstrom, each controlled by different Dark Mechanicum factions, or Chaos Warbands, that have captured and maintained the facilities. The Hellforge on the demon world of Galmec specializes in producing corrupted vehicles, its production lines churning out Rhino transports and Predator tanks that have been modified with demon touch components. The Forge of Relentless Agony within the Maelstrom focuses on sonic weapons and other Slaneshi equipment, its tech priests having perfected techniques for creating noise marine wargear that amplifies the wielder's connection to the Dark Prince. The Plague Forge of Bubonicus produces Nurglite equipment, including the Blight grenades and Plague knives that Death Guard warbands favor, its facilities perpetually wreathed in toxic fumes that would kill unprotected humans within seconds. Access to these forges provides warbands with crucial advantages in the Long War, allowing them to maintain equipment that would otherwise degrade beyond repair and acquire specialized weapons unavailable through conventional means. A warband that establishes reliable relationships with multiple forges gains the ability to outfit their warriors with diverse equipment suited to specific mission requirements, switching between standard bolters for general combat and specialized demon weapons when facing particularly dangerous opponents. The need to maintain these relationships drives much of the raiding activity that Chaos forces conduct, as warbands must constantly acquire the resources and sacrifices that Forge masters demand in payment. The risks inherent in demon engine operation ensure that only the most desperate or confident warbands employ these weapons extensively. The bound demons never truly accept their imprisonment, constantly seeking weaknesses in the containment systems that might allow escape, or at least the opportunity to cause havoc among their supposed masters. A demon engine that suffers significant damage might experience breaches in its binding wards, allowing the trapped entity to assert greater control over the machine's actions. These partially freed engines sometimes turn on nearby friendly forces, the demons seizing the opportunity to kill anything within reach before the binding can be restored or the engine is destroyed. Warpsmiths and sorcerers who accompany demon engine formations spend as much effort monitoring their own war machines as directing them against enemies, their constant vigilance necessary to prevent catastrophic failures. The maintenance requirements for demon engines exceed those of conventional vehicles by orders of magnitude. Standard Imperial vehicles require regular mechanical maintenance and ritual appeasement of their machine spirits, tasks that trained tech priests can perform with reasonable reliability. Demon engines demand continuous monitoring of their binding wards, regular reinforcement of containment runes that degrade from the demon's constant pressure against them, and periodic offerings that satisfy the bound entity enough to maintain its cooperation. A warpsmith servicing a defiler must inspect every containment rune for signs of wear, reinscribe any symbols that have faded or been damaged, and conduct rituals that feed the bound demon enough psychic energy to keep it from attempting escape while not empowering it enough to break free. The combat effectiveness of demon engines justifies these extensive maintenance requirements for warbands that can afford to maintain them. A single defiler provides firepower equivalent to multiple conventional vehicles while possessing mobility that allows it to operate in terrain where tanks would become immobilized. The demon's intelligence allows it to adapt to changing battlefield conditions without requiring constant direction from its handlers, freeing commanders to focus on broader tactical concerns. The psychological impact of demon engines often equals their physical destructive capacity, as Imperial forces facing these abominations must overcome both their weapons and the terror that their unnatural nature inspires. Guardsmen who might hold their positions against conventional armor frequently break and run when demon engines advance toward them, the sight of machines that move with predatory purpose and radiate malevolence proving too much for mortal courage to withstand. The evolution of demon engine designs continues as Dark Mechanicum adepts experiment with new configurations and binding techniques. Recent patterns include the Chiton Ravager, a massive demon engine that stands as tall as an Imperial Knight and wields weapons capable of destroying super heavy vehicles. The Decimator, another recent development, provides heavy fire support through multiple weapon mounts that can be configured for anti-infantry or anti-armor roles depending on tactical requirements. These newer designs incorporate lessons learned from millennia of demon engine operation, with improved containment systems that reduce the risk of catastrophic binding failures and weapons integration that allows bound demons to enhance their effectiveness without requiring constant supervision. The strategic implications of widespread demon engine deployment concern Imperial military planners who recognize that Chaos forces have achieved capabilities that conventional armies struggle to counter. A warband equipped with multiple demon engines can conduct operations that would require significantly larger forces if they relied solely on standard vehicles and infantry. The engine's ability to operate independently reduces the command and control burden on warband leadership, allowing smaller elite forces to achieve objectives that would otherwise require extensive support elements. The Imperium's response has focused on developing specialized anti-demon weapons and training units specifically to counter these threats, but the demon engine's diversity and the constant introduction of new patterns make it difficult to establish effective countermeasures that work reliably across all variants. The warbands that pledge themselves entirely to a single chaos god undergo transformations that affect every aspect of their existence, from their physical forms to their tactical doctrines and internal hierarchies. These cult warbands represent chaos worship in its purest expression, their warriors having surrendered themselves completely to their patron deity's influence. The four major chaos gods each attract followers whose temperaments and desires align with that god's domain, creating distinct warband cultures that differ as dramatically from each other as they do from undivided forces. A Khornate warband operates according to principles that would seem incomprehensible to Slaaneshi followers, while Nurglite forces pursue objectives that Tzeentchian sorcerers would consider pointless. This specialization grants cult warbands tremendous effectiveness within their chosen spheres, but also creates exploitable weaknesses that their enemies can leverage. The World Eaters exemplify Khornate worship taken to its ultimate extreme, their legion having fragmented into countless small warbands that roam the Eye of Terror and raid Imperial space in an endless quest for blood and skulls. The Butcher's nails implanted in their brains during the Great Crusade ensure that these warriors exist in a state of perpetual rage, their higher cognitive functions gradually burning away as the Archaeotech devices push them toward pure aggression. A World Eater's warband typically numbers between 50 and 300 warriors, as larger formations inevitably collapse into internal bloodshed when the accumulated rage reaches critical mass. The champions who lead these warbands maintain their positions through constant displays of martial dominance, beating down challengers in brutal combats that leave both participants wounded but rarely result in deaths that would deplete the warband's already limited numbers. The internal culture of World Eaters' warbands revolves around gladiatorial traditions inherited from Angron's time as a slave fighter on New Syria. The warriors spend their time between battles engaging in ritual duels within fighting pits, their need for violence satisfied through controlled combat that channels their aggression without destroying the warband's cohesion. These duels follow specific rules that vary between warbands, but generally prohibit killing blows while allowing significant injury. A typical bout might continue until one combatant can no longer stand or yields through prescribed gestures that even rage-maddened warriors recognize. The audience of fellow World Eaters watches these contests with intense focus, their own bloodlust temporarily satisfied through vicarious participation. Champions who consistently win these duels accumulate status within the warband, their combat prowess earning them respect that transcends the normal hierarchy of rank and authority. The Sanctified represent a World Eaters warband that has achieved unusual stability through their adoption of structured blood rituals that satisfy Khorne's demands while maintaining operational effectiveness. Their champion, Kosalax the Forsworn, commands through a combination of physical might and the implementation of traditions that give the warband's violence purpose beyond simple slaughter. The Sanctified conduct ceremonies before major battles where they offer prayers to Khorne and dedicate their coming kills to the blood god, these rituals focusing their aggression on designated enemies rather than allowing it to dissipate in random violence. The warband maintains a count of skulls taken in each engagement, with individual warriors competing to achieve the highest tallies. This competition channels their natural aggression into productive directions, as warriors focus on killing enemies efficiently rather than engaging in prolonged duels that might reduce their overall kill counts. The physical transformation that affects dedicated Khornate warriors manifests in ways that enhance their combat capabilities while gradually reducing their capacity for complex thought. Muscle mass increases beyond even the enhanced physiology of standard Chaos Space Marines, their frames swelling until their power armor must be modified to accommodate the growth. Bone density increases proportionally, creating skeletal structures capable of supporting the additional muscle tissue and absorbing impacts that would shatter normal bones. Brass begins to grow through their skin in patterns that suggest armor plating, these metallic growths fusing with their ceramite armor to create integrated protection that blurs the line between equipment and body. Their skulls thicken and develop ridges or horns that serve both as natural weapons and as marks of Khorne's favor. The neurological changes prove more significant than the physical mutations in determining how Khornate warbands operate. The Butcher's nails accelerate natural aggression while suppressing emotional responses unrelated to violence, but even World Eaters without these implants experience similar degradation as Khorne's influence saturates their consciousness. Higher reasoning becomes difficult as their thoughts return constantly to combat, blood, and the acquisition of skulls for their patron. Strategic planning beyond basic tactical responses grows nearly impossible for individual warriors, though champions who retain fragments of their original intelligence can still direct their warbands towards specific objectives. The degradation occurs gradually over centuries, with ancient World Eaters who have served Khorne since the heresy existing as little more than killing machines that respond to the most basic commands. The combat doctrine employed by Khornate warbands emphasizes direct assault and close combat, their attacks consisting of straightforward charges that rely on speed, ferocity, and overwhelming violence rather than tactical sophistication. A World Eater's assault begins with rapid deployment via rhino transports or teleportation directly into enemy positions, the warriors emerging from their vehicles already in the grip of battle frenzy. They advance in loose formations that allow individual champions to seek worthy opponents while maintaining enough cohesion to overwhelm defensive positions through concentrated violence. Chain axes and chainwords represent their preferred weapons, these brutal implements allowing them to tear through enemy armor while spraying blood that further feeds their rage. Plasma pistols and bolt pistols provide ranged capability, though Khornate warriors view these weapons as tools for closing distance rather than primary armaments. The relationship between Khornate warbands and their patron deity functions more directly than the complex theological frameworks that other chaos forces maintain. Khorne demands only blood and skulls, caring nothing for the source as long as the killing continues. This simplicity creates warband cultures focused entirely on martial prowess and the accumulation of kills, with religious observance consisting primarily of dedicating slaughter to the blood god. The most devoted Khornate champions develop direct connections to their patron that manifest during combat as supernatural enhancements to their already formidable capabilities. A champion in the midst of battle frenzy might feel Khorne's attention focus on them, their strength doubling and their wounds closing, as the blood god rewards particularly impressive displays of violence. These moments of divine favor prove addictive, driving champions to seek ever greater heights of carnage in hopes of experiencing that connection again. The Tzeentchian approach to chaos worship differs fundamentally from Khorne's straightforward demands, as the architect of fate values cunning, knowledge, and the execution of elaborate schemes over simple violence. The Thousand Sons operate as the archetypal Tzeentchian warband, though the rubric of Ahriman has created unique dynamics that distinguish them from other sorcerous forces. The majority of Thousand Sons warriors exist as rubric marines, their bodies reduced to dust contained within sealed power armor that responds to the psychic commands of the warband's sorcerers. These animated suits of armor maintain perfect discipline and execute orders with mechanical precision, but they lack initiative or independent thought. The sorcerers who retain their consciousness after the rubrics casting command squads of these mindless warriors, their psychic abilities allowing them to coordinate multiple units simultaneously while maintaining the concentration necessary for their own sorcerous attacks. The physical mutations affecting Tzeentchian sorcerers reflect the changer of Wei's capricious nature and the instability inherent in channeling raw warp energy through mortal flesh. Additional eyes sprout across their bodies in seemingly random locations, each capable of perceiving different aspects of reality or gazing into alternate timelines where events unfold differently. These extra eyes provide tactical advantages during combat, as the sorcerer can observe multiple angles simultaneously and sometimes perceive enemy actions before they occur. Feathers emerge from their skin in colors that exist outside normal human perception, their hues shifting in response to nearby warp currents or the sorcerer's emotional state. The flesh itself becomes mutable, its consistency changing from solid to semi-liquid and back again, as the sorcerer's control over their physical form weakens under constant exposure to transformative energies. The pursuit of forbidden knowledge drives Tzeentchian warbands with the same intensity that bloodlust motivates Khornate forces, though the methods and objectives differ completely. A Thousand Sons sorcerer might spend decades researching a single arcane text recovered from a destroyed library world, their studies revealing connections between seemingly unrelated events that suggest larger patterns at work. These investigations often lead to the acquisition of additional artifacts or grimoires, each new piece of knowledge opening paths to further mysteries. The sorcerers conduct raids specifically to acquire these items, their target selection based on intelligence gathered through divination and research rather than strategic or material considerations. A warband might assault a heavily defended fortress world to recover a single book from its archives, accepting significant casualties in exchange for knowledge that advances their understanding of the warp's fundamental nature. The Scourged represent a Tzeentchian warband whose pursuit of forbidden knowledge has transformed them into something barely recognizable as Space Marines. Their champion received visions directly from Tzeentch during a ritual that went catastrophically wrong, the experience burning away his sanity while granting him glimpses of the great architect's plans. The Warband followed their leader into obsessive study of these visions, attempting to decode messages they believed were embedded in seemingly random events. Their bodies mutated extensively as they delved deeper into Tzeentchian mysteries, with some warriors developing so many additional limbs and sensory organs that they required extensive modifications to their armor. The Scourged conduct raids that appear random to outside observers, but follow patterns that make sense only to those who share their leader's fractured understanding of causality and fate. The combat doctrine employed by Tzeentchian warbands emphasizes sorcery and ranged firepower over close combat, their tactics designed to leverage psychic superiority while minimizing exposure to direct assault. Rubric Marines advance in disciplined formations that maintain overlapping fields of fire, their inferno bolters spitting shells wreathed in warp flame that burns through armor and flesh with equal ease. The sorcerers position themselves to maximize their spells' effectiveness while remaining protected by their mindless warriors, their psychic attacks targeting enemy commanders and heavy weapons teams that pose the greatest threats. Tzeentchian forces excel at defensive operations where they can establish prepared positions and channel attackers into kill zones, their sorcerers weaving protective wards that deflect incoming fire while their Rubric Marines methodically eliminate enemies with precise volleys. The relationship between Tzeentchian warbands and their patron deity operates through layers of complexity that reflect the architect of fate's nature as the master of schemes and manipulation. Tzeentch rarely provides direct assistance or clear guidance, instead offering visions and prophecies that require interpretation and often contain multiple valid meanings. A sorcerer who receives a vision from Tzeentch must determine which elements represent literal truth, which are metaphorical, and which might be deliberate misdirection designed to test the recipient's wisdom. This uncertainty creates warband cultures where debate and analysis occupy as much time as combat operations, with sorcerers arguing about the correct interpretation of their patron's messages and the best methods for advancing their understanding of the great work. The mutations affecting Tzeentchian followers sometimes progress beyond the point where the individual can maintain a coherent physical form, their flesh shifting so rapidly that it loses all stability. These unfortunates devolve into chaos-spawn, mindless creatures whose bodies represent every possible mutation occurring simultaneously. The threat of this transformation haunts all Tzeentchian sorcerers, as they know that each spell they cast and each ritual they conduct brings them closer to that fate. Some warbands maintain spawn as weapons, herding the creatures toward enemy positions, where their unpredictable mutations and mindless aggression create chaos. The sorcerers view these beasts with a mixture of contempt and fear, seeing in them the potential future that awaits anyone who draws too deeply on Tzeentch's power without sufficient control. The Death Guard represent Nurglite worship in its most organized form, their plague companies maintaining structures inherited from their time as the 14th Legion, while incorporating the blessings of the plague god into every aspect of their existence. Mortarian's continued presence provides the Death Guard with more centralized leadership than most other Traitor Legions possess, though individual plague companies operate with considerable autonomy when pursuing their campaigns across the galaxy. The physical transformation that Nurgle's gifts impose affects every Death Guard warrior, their bodies bloating with disease and corruption, while paradoxically gaining resilience that allows them to survive injuries that would kill normal Space Marines instantly. The process begins with numbness spreading through the warrior's extremities as nerve endings die, the loss of pain sensation representing Nurgle's first gift to his followers. This absence of pain proves liberating rather than debilitating, as the warrior no longer fears injury and can continue fighting despite wounds that would incapacitate others through shock and agony. The flesh swells as diseases proliferate within their bodies, bacteria and viruses that exist in impossible symbiosis, transforming the warrior's tissues into breeding grounds for Nurgle's plagues. Pustules erupt across their skin, weeping infectious fluids that pool within their armor and drip onto the ground wherever they walk. the stench becomes overwhelming. A miasma of rot and decay that precedes Deathguard forces into battle and lingers long after they depart. The armor worn by Deathguard warriors fuses with their corrupted flesh, the ceramite becoming organic as rust and corrosion spread across its surface. The power armor systems continue functioning despite this degradation, sustained by the same unnatural resilience that keeps the warriors themselves alive. Cracks appear in the armor plating as it swells to accommodate the bloated flesh beneath, these gaps revealing the diseased tissue within while somehow not compromising the armor's protective capabilities. The warriors decorate their armor with tally marks representing the diseases they carry, each symbol carefully inscribed to honor a specific plague that Nurgle has blessed them with. Some Deathguard maintain detailed records of their infections, cataloging symptoms and transmission vectors with the enthusiasm of scholars pursuing academic research. The psychological changes accompanying Nurglite corruption prove as significant as the physical transformations, as warriors who accept Nurgle's gifts develop an almost jovial disposition despite their horrific condition. They laugh as they spread disease, genuinely believing they offer salvation through infection and liberation through the acceptance of decay. This contentment stems from Nurgle's nature as the god of despair who has transcended despair, his followers finding peace in the acceptance of mortality and entropy. A Deathguard warrior views his diseases as blessings to be shared rather than afflictions to be cured, his mission to spread Nurgle's gifts to those still suffering under the delusion that health and life have value. This philosophy creates warband cultures characterized by dark humor and camaraderie, as warriors who share the same blessed diseases bond over their common afflictions. The Purge exemplify Nurglite philosophy taken to its most nihilistic extreme, their interpretation of Nurgle's teachings focusing on the inevitability of death and the futility of resistance against entropy. The Warband conducts campaigns designed to demonstrate the worthlessness of life and the superiority of decay, their attacks targeting population centers where they can inflict maximum casualties. The Purge employ chemical weapons and biological agents alongside their standard armaments, their goal to reduce entire worlds to lifeless wastelands where only Nurgle's plagues thrive. The Warband's champion leads through example, his own body so thoroughly corrupted that he exists as a walking plague vector whose mere presence spreads disease to anyone nearby. The Purge maintain that they perform a service by ending the suffering inherent in existence, their attacks representing mercy rather than cruelty. The combat doctrine employed by Nurglite warbands emphasizes resilience and attrition over speed or maneuver, their tactics designed to leverage their supernatural durability while grinding down enemies through sustained pressure. Deathguard forces advance at a deliberate pace that reflects both their bloated physiology and their confidence in their ability to absorb enemy fire without significant casualties. They maintain tight formations that maximize the effectiveness of their plague weapons, while ensuring that warriors who fall receive immediate support from their brothers. The blight grenades they carry release clouds of infectious spores that linger in the air, transforming battlefields into plague zones where unprotected enemies sicken and die within minutes of exposure. The plague knives and plague swords wielded by Deathguard warriors carry diseases that resist all treatment, their victims suffering lingering deaths even from minor wounds. A scratch from a plague blade introduces Nurgle's rot into the victim's bloodstream, the infection spreading rapidly through their body, while their immune system proves helpless to combat it. The disease causes the flesh to necrotize, while the victim remains conscious, forcing them to watch as their body literally rots away over hours or days. This psychological torment pleases Nurgle as much as the physical suffering, as the victim experiences despair at their inevitable death and the failure of their faith or technology to save them. Deathguard warriors collect samples from their victims, studying how different species and individuals respond to various plagues to refine their understanding of disease transmission and effects. The relationship between Nurglite warbands and their patron deity operates through cycles of infection and renewal that mirror the natural processes of decay and rebirth. Nurgle views his followers as beloved children whose diseases represent his affection, each new plague a gift that demonstrates his care for their development. The Death Guard reciprocate this affection through their dedication to spreading his blessings, their campaigns serving as missionary work that brings Nurgle's salvation to those still trapped in the fear of death. The Garden of Nurgle, that realm within the warp where the plague god tends to his diseases like a gardener cultivating flowers, serves as the spiritual home for all Nurglite forces. Warriors who die in Nurgle's service sometimes find themselves resurrected as plague marines, their bodies reconstituted from the diseases that killed them, and return to the material realm to continue spreading their patron's gifts. The Emperor's children represent Slaaneshi worship in its most refined and decadent form, their pursuit of perfection and excess having transformed them from the proud warriors they once were into creatures that exist solely for sensation and experience. The Legion fragmented completely after the heresy, with individual warbands organizing around shared obsessions that define their particular interpretation of the Dark Prince's teachings. Some pursue perfection in specific combat techniques, practicing the same strikes and movements for centuries until they achieve a state of flow where thought and action merge seamlessly. Others focus on sensory experiences, seeking stimulation through increasingly extreme means as their heightened senses require ever greater intensity to register satisfaction. The diversity of these obsessions creates Emperor's Children warbands that differ dramatically from each other despite their shared allegiance to Slaanesh. The physical transformation affecting dedicated Slaaneshi warriors enhances their senses to levels that transcend normal human perception, while reshaping their bodies to reflect the Dark Prince's aesthetic preferences. Their vision sharpens until they perceive individual dust motes floating through the air and distinguish colors in spectrums invisible to baseline humans. Hearing becomes so acute that they detect heartbeats from across a battlefield and recognize individuals by the unique rhythm of their breathing. Touch sensitivity increases until the texture of their own armor against their skin provides constant stimulation, every movement generating sensations that others would find overwhelming. These enhanced senses transform combat into a symphony of experience, every impact of their blades, every spray of blood, every scream of their victims registering with crystalline clarity that approaches ecstasy. The bodies of Slaaneshi champions develop mutations that combine beauty and horror in equal measure, their flesh reshaping according to aesthetic principles that human minds struggle to process. Additional limbs sprout to improve combat capability or enhance their capacity for sensation, these extra appendages often appearing in configurations that violate bilateral symmetry while somehow achieving visual balance. Their faces reshape into masks of androgynous perfection that appear more alien than human, features too perfect and proportions too precise to occur naturally. The skin takes on unusual textures or colors, becoming porcelain smooth in some areas while developing scales or feathers in others. These mutations reflect Slaanesh's nature as the god of excess and perfection, each change pushing the champion further from humanity while bringing them closer to their patron's ideal of transcendent experience. The flawless host exemplify the Emperor's children's pursuit of perfection taken to obsessive extremes, their warband having dedicated itself to achieving flawlessness in every aspect of warfare and existence. Their champion leads rituals where the warband analyzes their performance in recent battles, identifying any imperfections in their execution and developing training regimens to eliminate these flaws. Individual warriors spend centuries perfecting specific techniques, their practice sessions becoming meditative exercises where they lose themselves in the repetition of movements refined to microscopic precision. The flawless host view combat as performance art, their attacks choreographed to achieve maximum aesthetic impact alongside tactical effectiveness. They record their battles using picked capture devices, reviewing the footage afterward to identify moments where their performance fell short of perfection and planning improvements for future engagements. The sonic weaponry employed by Emperor's Children warbands represents the most distinctive element of their arsenal, these instruments of war-producing sounds that kill through resonance and psychological trauma. Noise marines carry sonic blasters or blastmasters, weapons that generate acoustic frequencies calibrated to shatter armor and liquefy internal organs. The sounds these weapons produce transcend simple noise, their frequencies carefully tuned to create harmonics that resonate with the target's physical structure and nervous system. A sonic blast might cause a victim's bones to vibrate at their resonant frequency until they fracture, or induce seizures by overwhelming their auditory cortex with stimulation it cannot process. The noise marines themselves experience these sounds as music rather than weapons fire, their enhanced senses and Slaneshi corruption allowing them to perceive beauty in frequencies that drive others to madness. The cultivation of chaos cults across imperial worlds begins long before any warband arrives in orbit, the corruption spreading through populations like a disease that remains invisible until symptoms become impossible to ignore. A single corrupted individual can plant seeds that grow into full-scale insurrections given enough time and the right conditions. The methods vary based on the cult's patron deity and the specific vulnerabilities of the target population, but certain patterns repeat across thousands of infected worlds. A factory worker exposed to forbidden texts hidden in shipping containers begins sharing their contents with trusted colleagues, the knowledge spreading through informal networks that exist beneath the administratum's notice. A noble experimenting with prohibited psychic practices makes contact with entities in the warp who offer power in exchange for service, their influence gradually extending through the aristocratic circles they inhabit. A preacher whose faith has been shaken by witnessing the Imperium's failures receives visions that reinterpret the Imperial Creed in ways that acknowledge the Chaos Gods as the true powers governing reality. The psychological manipulation employed by cult recruiters exploits the specific grievances and desires that make individuals vulnerable to corruption. A hive worker crushed beneath the weight of endless labor and negligible compensation proves susceptible to promises of power and freedom from oppression. The Chaos Recruiter does not immediately reveal the full extent of what they offer, instead beginning with subtle suggestions that the worker's suffering is unnecessary and imposed by a system designed to exploit them. These initial conversations plant doubts about the Imperial Creed's teachings regarding duty and sacrifice, creating space for alternative philosophies to take root. The progression occurs gradually over months or years, each conversation pushing slightly further until the recruit accepts propositions they would have rejected with horror at the beginning of the process. Forbidden texts serve as primary vectors for corruption in populations with access to written materials and sufficient literacy. These documents range from philosophical treatises that question the imperial truth's foundations to grimoires containing actual rituals for contacting warp entities. The texts often appear innocuous at first, their early sections containing legitimate criticisms of imperial governance or theological arguments that seem to fall within acceptable bounds of debate. The corruption emerges in later chapters, where the author's logic leads to conclusions that justify chaos worship as a rational response to the universe's true nature. A reader who has followed the argument this far finds themselves intellectually committed to positions that align with heresy, their own reasoning process having brought them to conclusions they might have rejected if presented directly. The most effective forbidden texts include practical instructions for rituals that produce tangible results. As a reader who successfully summons a minor demon or receives a genuine vision finds their skepticism overcome by direct experience. Demonic whispers reach individuals through dreams and moments of altered consciousness, the entities of the warp exploiting weaknesses in the barrier between real space and the immaterium. A psyker whose abilities manifest without proper training becomes an obvious target, their uncontrolled connection to the warp creating openings that demons exploit ruthlessly. The whispers begin subtly, appearing as intrusive thoughts that the victim initially dismisses as their own imagination. A suggestion to take a different route home, a sudden urge to visit a specific location, thoughts about actions they would normally never consider. The demon cultivates these impulses carefully, ensuring early suggestions lead to positive outcomes that build trust. The psyker who follows the whispered advice and avoids a gang ambush or discovers unexpected wealth begins to view the voice as a helpful guide rather than a threat. The corruption accelerates once this trust is established, the demon's suggestions becoming progressively more transgressive until the victim has committed acts that make reconciliation with imperial law impossible. The role of dark apostles in converting populations transforms individual corruption into organized movements capable of challenging imperial authority. These Chaos Space Marine champions combine theological knowledge with genuine charisma and the supernatural presence that transhuman warriors project. A dark apostle who arrives on a world where cult cells have been operating for years brings legitimacy and direction to what might otherwise remain scattered groups of heretics. Their sermons provide theological frameworks that justify the convert's new beliefs while offering visions of the rewards awaiting the faithful. The Dark Apostle does not simply demand worship through threats, though they certainly employ violence against those who resist. Instead, they present arguments designed to appeal to the specific grievances and desires that drove individuals toward chaos in the first place. The theological arguments employed by Dark Apostles vary based on their audience and patron deity, but certain themes recur across different traditions. The fundamental assertion holds that the Emperor's divinity represents either a lie or a cruel joke, with the Dark Apostle providing evidence drawn from the Imperium's failures and the suffering it inflicts on its citizens. They point to the grinding poverty of hive worlds, where billions labor in conditions barely sufficient to sustain life, asking what kind of benevolent God would permit such misery among his devoted followers. They reference the Imperium's technological stagnation and the loss of knowledge from the dark age of technology, suggesting that humanity's current state represents decline rather than progress. The bureaucratic inefficiency that allows worlds to starve while others overflow with surplus becomes evidence of a system fundamentally broken and a god either absent or incompetent. Having established the Emperor's inadequacy, the Dark Apostle presents the Chaos Gods as honest powers who reward their followers with tangible benefits rather than demanding faith without evidence. A Khornate preacher emphasizes strength and martial prowess, arguing that Khorne values courage and skill in battle, regardless of the warrior's origin or social status. They contrast this meritocratic approach with the Imperium's rigid hierarchies, where birth determines destiny and competence matters less than connections. A Nurglite Dark Apostle speaks of acceptance and the freedom that comes from embracing mortality rather than fearing it, their message resonating with populations ground down by disease and deprivation who find comfort in the idea that their suffering has meaning. The Slaaneshi preacher offers liberation from the Imperium's puritanical restrictions, promising experiences and sensations that transcend the gray monotony of imperial existence. The Tzeentchian advocate presents knowledge and the possibility of changing one's fate through cunning rather than accepting predetermined roles. The sermons incorporate demonstrations of power that provide concrete evidence supporting the Dark Apostle's claims. They perform rituals that summon demons or grant blessings to faithful converts, these supernatural manifestations proving more convincing than any argument. A worker who receives Nurgle's blessing and finds their chronic pain vanishing becomes a true believer whose testimony influences their peers more effectively than any sermon. A soldier granted Khorne's strength, who defeats opponents previously beyond their capabilities, spreads word of the Blood God's generosity through their victories. These demonstrations carefully balance revelation and concealment, showing enough power to inspire awe while maintaining some mystery about the full extent of what the Chaos Gods offer. The conversion of populations accelerates once critical mass is achieved and the cult transitions from hidden cells to open movement. The Dark Apostle coordinates this transition carefully, ensuring sufficient strength exists to resist initial imperial responses while maintaining operational security until the moment of revelation. The uprising typically begins with coordinated strikes against imperial authorities, PDF command structures, and Adeptus Arbites facilities targeted simultaneously to prevent organized resistance. The cultists emerge from hiding armed with weapons stockpiled during years of preparation, their numbers often shocking authorities, who believed they maintained adequate surveillance of potential threats. A hive that appeared stable can erupt into chaos within hours as millions of cultists reveal themselves and begin seizing control of critical infrastructure. The slave-taking raids conducted by Chaos Warbands serve multiple purposes beyond simple acquisition of labor. The captives represent resources that can be exploited in various ways depending on the warband's needs and the individual's characteristics. The most physically capable prisoners become laborers in demon forges or fortress construction projects, their lives consumed in work that would kill baseline humans within weeks, but which augmented slaves can sustain for months or years before their bodies fail. The Warband's apothecaries evaluate captives for genetic compatibility with the Space Marine creation process, identifying individuals whose physiology might accept gene seed implantation. These rare candidates receive markedly better treatment than other prisoners, as their potential value as future Chaos Space Marines justifies the investment of resources in maintaining their health. The value of mortal captives as sacrifices varies based on the Warband's patron deity and current operational requirements. Khornate forces prefer victims capable of fighting back, as Khorn values martial skill and courage over helpless slaughter. They conduct ritual combats where prisoners receive weapons and the opportunity to die with honor, their deaths in battle providing greater spiritual value than simple executions. The most impressive prisoners who demonstrate exceptional courage or skill sometimes receive offers to join the Warband's cultist forces rather than dying, their prowess earning them a chance at survival. Nurglite Warbands use captives as test subjects for new plague strains, infecting them with experimental diseases and monitoring the progression to refine their understanding of transmission vectors and symptom development. The suffering these experiments cause pleases Nurgle while providing practical knowledge that improves the Death Guard's effectiveness at biological warfare. Slaaneshi Warbands view captives as opportunities for artistic expression and the exploration of sensation, their treatment of prisoners reflecting the Dark Prince's emphasis on experience and excess. The tortures inflicted serve aesthetic purposes as much as practical ones, with the torturers seeking to create specific emotional and physical responses that achieve a perverse beauty. A master torturer might spend days working on a single victim, their implements and techniques chosen to produce a symphony of suffering that builds toward a crescendo of agony and ecstasy. The recordings of these sessions become treasured possessions within the Warband, reviewed and analyzed like performance art. Tzeentchian forces employ captives in sorcerous rituals that require mortal participants, their life force and souls consumed to power spells or bind demons. The sorcerers select victims based on psychic potential or specific characteristics that align with ritual requirements, a psyker's death providing far greater energy than a normal human's. The transformation of captives into chaos spawn represents the ultimate degradation. Their bodies and minds destroyed as uncontrolled mutations reduce them to mindless beasts. This fate typically befalls prisoners who prove unsuitable for other purposes, but whose suffering might still please the chaos gods. The transformation process involves exposure to concentrated warp energy or the forced consumption of mutagenic substances that trigger rapid and uncontrolled changes. The victim's body begins shifting immediately, limbs multiplying or fusing together, flesh flowing like wax as their form loses all stability. The psychological dissolution occurs simultaneously, their consciousness fragmenting as their brain structure changes too rapidly for their mind to maintain coherence. Within hours, a human being becomes a mass of writhing flesh studded with randomly placed sensory organs, limbs, and weapons, their original identity completely erased. The creation of possessed hosts requires captives with strong wills and psychic sensitivity, as the demon binding process demands victims capable of sustaining a never-born entity's presence within their body. The Dark Apostles who conduct these rituals screen potential hosts carefully, seeking individuals whose psychological profiles suggest they might survive the initial possession without their consciousness being immediately overwhelmed. The ritual involves summoning a demon and forcing it into the victim's body through a combination of sorcerous compulsion and the host's own desperate acceptance of the entity's presence. The process causes excruciating pain as the demon's essence burns through the host's nervous system and begins reshaping their physical form to accommodate its nature. Successful possessions produce warriors who combine mortal cunning with demonic power, their hybrid nature making them valuable assets despite the instability inherent in their condition. The mutant populations that follow Chaos Warbands come from diverse sources and display physical variations that reflect both their origins and the specific chaos corruption affecting them. Some mutants are born on demon worlds, where reality's instability causes random mutations in every generation, their abnormalities ranging from minor cosmetic changes to major alterations that grant supernatural abilities. Others develop mutations after exposure to warp energy during raids or while serving as cultists, the corruption manifesting gradually as tumors, extra limbs, or sensory organs that appear over months or years. The most stable mutant populations inhabit worlds within the Eye of Terror or other warp storms where generations of exposure have created breeding populations with relatively consistent mutation patterns. The social hierarchy within mutant tribes typically reflects physical power and the favor of the chaos gods, with the most heavily mutated individuals often occupying leadership positions if their changes grant combat advantages. A mutant who develops natural weapons like claws or acidic saliva commands respect from their less gifted peers, their enhanced capabilities making them effective warriors and intimidating rivals. The tribes maintain their own cultures and traditions that combine elements from their original human societies with practices developed to accommodate their altered nature. Religious observance focuses on the chaos gods who bless them with their mutations, the mutants viewing their physical changes as divine gifts rather than afflictions. They conduct rituals thanking their patrons for the transformations that set them apart from baseline humanity and demonstrate their chosen status. The Beastmen tribes represent a distinct category of abhuman that predates the Imperium itself, their origins lost in the Age of Strife, when human populations across the galaxy mutated in countless ways. These creatures combine human and animal characteristics in stable patterns that breed true across generations, creating populations that maintain consistent physical forms rather than experiencing random mutations. Beastmen possess enhanced strength and resilience compared to baseline humans, their animal traits providing natural weapons and improved senses that make them effective warriors. The tribes that follow Chaos Warbands do so because the Imperium classifies them as abhumans unworthy of tolerance, their physical appearance marking them for extermination regardless of their actions or beliefs. Chaos offers acceptance and the opportunity to strike back at the Imperium that hunts them, making the choice to serve the Dark Gods an obvious one for many Beastmen populations. The tribal warfare between different Beastmen groups creates internal competition that Chaos Warbands exploit to maintain control and improve their followers' combat effectiveness. The tribes maintain traditional rivalries based on territory, resources, and ancient grudges that predate their service to any Space Marine masters. A warband that commands multiple Beastmen tribes encourages controlled conflict between them, organizing ritual combats and raids where the tribes compete for status and resources. These contests serve as both entertainment and practical training, as the warriors who survive demonstrate their capability, while the tribes develop tactics through experience. The Warband's leadership intervenes only when the violence threatens to reduce their forces below acceptable levels, otherwise allowing the Beastmen to settle their disputes through traditional methods. The selective breeding programs employed by some warbands represent long-term investments in creating specialized warrior breeds optimized for specific combat roles. These programs require significant resources and time measured in generations rather than years, making them practical only for warbands with stable bases and sufficient population to support extended experimentation. The Iron Warriors conduct the most systematic breeding programs, their approach combining dark mechanicum genetic manipulation with traditional selective breeding to produce mutant strains with enhanced physical capabilities. They identify desirable traits in their mutant and beastmen populations, then arrange matings between individuals who display those characteristics. Over multiple generations, this process creates bloodlines that breed true for specific attributes like increased size, enhanced aggression, or improved resistance to environmental hazards. The warrior breeds produced through these programs serve as specialized troops that fill specific niches within the Warband's force structure. A breed developed for tunnel fighting might possess reduced height and enhanced dark vision, their compact frames allowing them to navigate confined spaces while their eyes perceive normally invisible details in darkness. Breeds intended for frontal assault display increased muscle mass and bone density, their physical power allowing them to engage enemy forces in direct combat where their lack of sophistication matters less than raw strength. The most successful breeding programs produce warriors who combine enhanced physical capabilities with sufficient intelligence to follow complex orders, creating troops that approach the effectiveness of well-trained human soldiers while costing far less to maintain. The relationship between Chaos Space Marines and their mortal followers operates on principles of domination and exploitation rather than genuine loyalty or shared purpose. The transhuman warriors view their cultists, mutants, and beastmen as tools to be used and discarded as circumstances require, their lives having value only insofar as they serve the Warband's objectives. This attitude stems from both practical considerations and the fundamental contempt that Chaos Space Marines develop for baseline humanity after centuries of corruption and exposure to the warp's transformative energies. A warrior who has survived for millennia and accumulated demonic gifts that elevate them far above mortal capabilities struggles to view unaugmented humans as anything more than resources, their brief lifespans and limited abilities making them seem insignificant compared to the eternal struggle of the Long War. The mortal followers accept this exploitation because they have nowhere else to turn, and because service to chaos offers rewards unavailable through imperial citizenship. A cultist who survives their first few battles and demonstrates competence receives better equipment and a degree of status within their unit, their proven capability earning them marginal improvements in treatment. The possibility of receiving mutations that grant supernatural abilities motivates many followers to seek the Chaos God's attention through acts of devotion and violence, each hoping to be blessed with gifts that elevate them above their peers. The most ambitious cultists dream of transformation into Chaos Space Marines, though they rarely understand the full requirements or the infinitesimal odds of achieving that goal. The practical management of large mortal followings requires administrative structures that many warbands find tedious but necessary. The word-bearers maintain the most sophisticated systems for organizing their cultist armies, their experience with religious hierarchies translating well to managing populations that number in the millions. They appoint cultist officers who handle day-to-day administration, while the Chaos Space Marines focus on strategic planning and combat operations. These officers maintain discipline through a combination of religious authority and brutal punishment for failure, their positions granting them power over their fellow mortals, while keeping them firmly subordinate to their transhuman masters. The system functions efficiently because it leverages existing human social structures and the cultists' religious devotion, creating self-sustaining hierarchies that require minimal intervention from the Warband's leadership. The Eye of Terror's geography defies conventional understanding of space and physical law, its boundaries fluctuating across light years as the warp's tides ebb and flow. Within this tier in reality, demon worlds orbit impossible stars, their surfaces reshaped by the thoughts and emotions that bleed through from the immaterium. The largest concentration of these corrupted planets clusters near the Eye's center, where the barrier between real space and the warp has worn so thin that demons manifest without requiring summoning rituals. Navigation through this region proves nearly impossible for vessels lacking navigators who have pledged themselves to the ruinous powers, as conventional astrogation fails completely when stellar positions shift based on the observer's emotional state rather than physical location. Sikaris stands as the word-bearer's primary stronghold, a world transformed through millennia of continuous ritual and devotion into a monument to chaos undivided. The planet's surface bears no resemblance to whatever it might have been before Lorgar claimed it following the heresy's conclusion. Vast cathedrals rise kilometers into the blood-red sky, their architecture combining Gothic imperial design with geometries that hurt to observe directly. The largest of these structures houses the Dark Council, the ruling body that coordinates word-bearers' activities across the galaxy. The cathedral's interior contains thousands of chapels dedicated to specific aspects of the four chaos gods, each maintained by dark apostles who conduct continuous ceremonies that keep the planet saturated with warp energy. The walls themselves have become semi-organic, pulsing with unholy life as the stone absorbs the psychic emanations from countless rituals. The population of Sikaris numbers in the hundreds of millions, consisting primarily of cultists who serve the word-bearers in various capacities. These mortals live in sprawling hive cities built in the shadows of the great cathedrals, their entire existence revolving around worship of the dark gods and service to their space marine masters. The most devout spend their days in prayer and self-mortification, their bodies bearing scars from ritual scarification and brandings that mark their dedication. Others work in manufactorums that produce ammunition and equipment for the Legion's warbands, their labor punctuated by mandatory prayer sessions, where dark apostles deliver sermons about the glory of chaos. The planet's forges operate continuously, their output sufficient to supply multiple host warbands simultaneously while maintaining stockpiles for future campaigns. The reality warping around Sikaris manifests in ways both subtle and dramatic. Time flows inconsistently across different regions of the planet, with some areas experiencing hours while others endure days. A cultist who enters a cathedral for morning prayers might emerge to find that weeks have passed outside, their family aged or dead while they experienced only a single service. The sky displays phenomena impossible in normal space, with multiple suns visible simultaneously despite the planet orbiting only one star, their positions shifting based on which chaos god currently holds the most influence over the world's warp-saturated atmosphere. Demons walk openly through the streets, their presence so common that the mortal population has learned to distinguish between different types and respond appropriately to each. Lesser demons serve as messengers or enforcers, while greater demons occasionally manifest to deliver proclamations from the dark gods themselves. Medringard represents Perturabo's vision of perfect fortification taken to its ultimate expression, the entire planet transformed into a fortress that could theoretically withstand assault by the full strength of the Imperium. The Iron Warriors claimed this world shortly after their retreat into the Eye of Terror, recognizing its strategic value and the opportunities its extensive mineral deposits provided. The planet's original surface has been completely buried beneath layers of fortifications, each generation of defenses built atop the previous as Perturabo's paranoia drove him to constantly improve his stronghold's protection. Gun emplacements cover every exposed surface, their fields of fire overlapping to create kill zones where nothing could survive concentrated bombardment from multiple directions. Void shield generators operate in redundant networks, their overlapping barriers capable of absorbing orbital strikes that would crack a planet's crust. The Fortress of Spite serves as Perturabo's personal citadel, a structure so vast that it qualifies as a hive city in its own right. The fortress occupies an entire continent, its walls rising hundreds of meters and extending equally far below ground. The exterior presents a uniform surface of dark iron and ceramite, broken only by weapon ports and sensor arrays that monitor the approaches for thousands of kilometers in every direction. The interior contains everything necessary for the Iron Warriors to wage war indefinitely, including gene seed repositories, training facilities, and the Forge of Souls that produces demon engines and corrupted war machines. The deepest levels house Perturabo's private laboratories, where he conducts research into siege warfare and fortification design, his work continuing despite his ascension to demon princehood, having theoretically freed him from such mortal concerns. The The slave populations on Medrengard endure conditions that make death seem preferable, their lives consumed in endless labor that maintains the planet's fortifications and feeds its forges. Millions of captives work in the manufactorums that line the fortress walls, their shifts lasting until exhaustion causes them to collapse at their stations. The Iron Warriors replace fallen workers immediately, viewing them as interchangeable components rather than individuals. The slaves receive minimal nutrition, just enough to sustain their bodies through another day of labor, and no medical care beyond basic measures to prevent plagues that might reduce productivity. Those who survive more than a few years develop mutations from constant exposure to warp-tainted materials and the corrupted atmosphere, their bodies adapting in ways that allow them to continue working despite injuries and diseases that should prove fatal. The Basilica of Iron within the Fortress of Spite houses the largest concentration of demon engines outside the Forge of Souls itself, thousands of war machines maintained in various states of readiness. Defilers stand in ranks that extend beyond visual range, their demon-possessed hulls dormant, but ready to activate within minutes of receiving orders. Mauler fiends crouch in designated bays, their mechanical limbs folded against their bodies, while the bound demons within them sleep fitfully. The warpsmiths who maintain this arsenal move through the basilica constantly, performing rituals that reinforce the binding wards and ensure the imprisoned demons remain contained. The air thrums with barely suppressed malevolence, the concentrated presence of so many bound Neverborn creating an atmosphere of threat that affects even the Iron Warriors who work here. The planet of the Sorcerers exists partially outside normal space-time, its location within the Eye of Terror shifting based on Magnus the Red's will, and the complex rituals his thousand sons conduct continuously. The world appears as a massive disk floating in the void, its underside invisible as if the planet has no depth when viewed from certain angles. The surface displays impossible architecture that would collapse under its own weight in real space. Towers that spiral upward for kilometers without visible support and bridges that connect structures across distances where no material should maintain integrity. The buildings themselves shift and reconfigure based on the sorceress research being conducted within them. A library might expand to accommodate new acquisitions, or a laboratory could relocate to a different part of the city to access specific warp currents. Tizca, the City of Light, dominates the planet of the sorcerers as it once dominated Prospero before that world's destruction. Magnus reconstructed his capital within the Eye of Terror, using sorcery to recreate the pyramids and libraries that the space wolves burned during their assault. The new Tizca surpasses the original in scale and grandeur, its structures built from materials that exist only partially in real space and extend into dimensions that human minds cannot properly perceive. The Great Library at the city's heart contains knowledge gathered from across the galaxy and beyond, its shelves holding texts from civilizations that existed before humanity's rise and grimoires that describe rituals capable of reshaping reality itself. Rubric Marines stand guard throughout the library, their mindless discipline perfect for protecting such valuable resources without the risk that conscious guards might be tempted to steal what they protect. The thousand sons who inhabit the planet of the sorcerers pursue individual research projects with minimal coordination beyond what Magnus directly commands. Each sorcerer maintains their own tower or laboratory where they conduct experiments into the warp's nature and attempt to decode the fundamental principles governing reality. Some study the rubric itself, seeking methods to reverse its effects or at least understand why it transformed their brothers into animated armor. Others investigate prophecy and divination, attempting to perceive future timelines with sufficient clarity to guide their actions toward desired outcomes. The most ambitious work on rituals that could reshape entire worlds or even alter the warp's fundamental nature, their goals so grandiose that success would elevate them to positions rivaling demon princes in power. The reality distortions affecting the planet of the sorcerers create an environment where the laws of physics apply only when convenient and can be suspended through sufficient sorceress will. Gravity operates inconsistently, with some towers experiencing normal pull toward the planet's center, while others exist in zones where up and down have no meaning. Time flows at different rates in different locations. A sorcerer might spend what feels like years researching a specific question, only to emerge and discover that mere days have passed outside their laboratory. The opposite occurs equally often, with hours of perceived work translating into decades of external time. The Thousand Suns have adapted to this temporal instability by abandoning conventional scheduling entirely, their activities coordinated through psychic communication that transcends normal causality. The process of planetary corruption that transforms normal worlds into demon worlds begins with the weakening of reality's barriers through concentrated warp activity. A world that hosts extensive chaos cult activity or serves as the site of major battles where emotions run high develops thin spots where the immaterium bleeds through into real space. These initial manifestations appear minor, strange dreams affecting the population, minor mutations in livestock, or electronic equipment malfunctioning in ways that suggest intelligence behind the failures. The corruption spreads as more individuals turn to chaos worship and conduct rituals that deliberately tear at reality's fabric, each ceremony creating additional weak points that allow warp energy to seep through in greater quantities. The role of warp storms in accelerating planetary corruption cannot be overstated, as these massive disturbances in the immaterium create conditions where the transformation process that might normally take centuries occurs within years or even months. A world caught within a warp storm's boundaries experiences reality erosion on massive scales, the laws of physics becoming suggestions rather than rules as the warp's chaotic nature asserts itself. The population undergoes rapid mutation as their bodies absorb ambient warp energy, their flesh reshaping according to the thoughts and emotions that saturate the storm's interior. The planet's geography begins shifting, mountains rising overnight where plains existed the day before, or oceans draining away to reveal landscapes that never existed in the material realm. The rituals required to complete a world's transformation into a true demon world demand resources and expertise that only the most powerful warbands possess. The ceremony must channel sufficient warp energy through specific focal points to permanently anchor the world partially within the immaterium, creating a stable hybrid state where demons can manifest freely without requiring constant summoning. The ritual's complexity requires multiple sorcerers working in coordination, their combined power directing the flows of warp energy along predetermined paths that reshape reality according to their will. The process typically involves mass sacrifices, with thousands or millions of victims killed in specific patterns that create psychic shockwaves powerful enough to tear holes in reality that refuse to close. The physical changes wrought upon geography during demonic transformation produce landscapes that combine elements from the material realm with impossible features drawn from the warp. A world claimed by Khorne develops mountain ranges formed from petrified blood and plains covered in brass that grows like vegetation, the metal sprouting from the ground in jagged formations that resemble forests of blades. Rivers flow with molten metal or actual blood that never coagulates, their courses carving canyons through stone that screams when cut. The sky burns with eternal fire that provides light without heat, or heat without light, depending on which aspect of Khorne's nature currently dominates the world's atmosphere. Fortresses rise spontaneously from the ground, their architecture designed for optimal killing zones, and their walls inscribed with runes that hunger for blood. A Nurglite demon world transforms into a garden of decay, where life and death merge into a single continuous cycle. The vegetation consists of plants that simultaneously grow and rot, their leaves budding and falling in the same moment, while flowers bloom and wither without ever existing in a static state. Swamps cover vast regions, their waters thick with disease-bearing organisms that exist in impossible concentrations without killing each other. The air itself carries plagues, viruses, and bacteria that float on every breeze and infect anything they touch. The inhabitants develop symbiotic relationships with these diseases, their bodies hosting entire ecosystems of microorganisms that keep them alive through means that violate every principle of biology. gardens tended by plague-bearers produce new strains of disease, each cultivated with the care that normal gardeners give to prize roses. Slaaneshi demon worlds assault the senses with stimulation so intense that baseline humans who arrive without preparation suffer immediate psychological damage. The colors exist outside normal spectrums, their hues causing physical pain to observe while simultaneously drawing the eye with magnetic attraction. Sounds layer over each other in combinations that should create cacophony, but instead produce harmonies that induce euphoria or agony depending on the listener's sensitivity. The very air carries scents that trigger powerful emotional and physical responses, perfumes that cause arousal or revulsion, or both simultaneously. The landscape itself seems designed to provoke specific sensory experiences, with crystal formations that sing when wind passes through them, and pools of liquid that shift between states of matter based on proximity to observers. Tzeentchian demon worlds display the most radical departures from physical law, their surfaces existing in states of constant flux where nothing maintains a consistent form for more than moments. Buildings flow like water, their walls and floors rearranging themselves based on patterns that suggest intelligence but defy comprehension. The inhabitants navigate through this chaos using sorcery or innate understanding of the change's underlying logic, their movements appearing random to outside observers, but actually following paths that shift in sync with the world's transformations. Libraries contain books whose contents change each time they're opened, the text rewriting itself to present information relevant to the current reader's questions or completely unrelated material that might prove useful years hence. The sky displays mathematical equations written in fire, their solutions revealing secrets about the universe's fundamental nature to those capable of understanding them. The Maelstrom occupies a region of the Ultima Segmentum, where reality has worn thin through millennia of warp storms and demonic incursions. This smaller cousin to the Eye of Terror lacks the older storm's vast size, but compensates through its strategic position deeper within Imperial space, allowing warbands based within it to strike at worlds that the Eye of Terror's forces cannot easily reach. The Maelstrom's interior contains dozens of demon worlds and corrupted systems, where chaos reigns openly, their populations having long since abandoned any pretense of imperial loyalty. The competing warbands that control territory within the storm maintain an uneasy balance of power, their conflicts limited by mutual recognition that excessive warfare would weaken all of them against external threats. The Red Corsairs dominate the Maelstrom's power structure through Huron Blackheart's political acumen and military strength, his control over New Badab providing him with resources that smaller warbands cannot match. However, numerous other forces maintain independent holdings that they defend fiercely against any encroachment. The Skulltakers, a Khornate warband, control several worlds where they conduct continuous gladiatorial games that serve as both religious observance and practical training. The Purge maintain plague worlds where they cultivate new diseases in populations deliberately infected to serve as test subjects. Smaller warbands claim individual planets or orbital stations, their territories too limited to threaten the major powers, but sufficient to support independent operations. The fortress monasteries that serve as warband bases within the Maelstrom and Eye of Terror combine defensive architecture with facilities necessary to support ongoing military operations. These structures typically occupy naturally defensible positions, such as mountain peaks or islands in toxic seas, their locations chosen to maximize the difficulty of assault while providing access to resources. The walls incorporate both conventional fortifications and sorcerous wards that deflect attacks through means beyond simple physical armor. Gun emplacements cover all approaches, their weapons ranging from standard autocannons to demon-possessed artillery pieces that fire shells guided by malevolent intelligence. Void shields protect the most critical structures, their generators maintained by warpsmiths who conduct daily rituals to ensure proper function. The interior layouts reflect the warband's priorities and patron deity's nature, with Khornate fortresses featuring extensive training grounds and arenas where warriors hone their skills through constant combat. Nurglite bases include plague laboratories where Death Guard sorcerers develop new diseases and test their effectiveness on captive populations. Slaaneshi fortresses contain chambers dedicated to excess and sensation, their purposes ranging from torture rooms to galleries displaying art created from the bodies of enemies. Tzeentchian strongholds feature libraries and ritual chambers where sorcerers conduct research and attempt to divine future events through various means of prophecy. The slave populations that maintain these fortresses live in conditions that vary based on their master's nature and the specific tasks they perform. Skilled laborers who possess knowledge necessary for fortress operations receive better treatment than simple manual workers, as their expertise makes them difficult to replace. Techno-thralls who maintain equipment and perform repairs work under the supervision of warpsmiths, their bodies augmented with crude cybernetics that allow them to interface directly with machinery. These individuals retain enough consciousness to perform complex tasks, but lack the free will to resist or escape, their minds bound through a combination of surgery and sorcerous conditioning. The unskilled masses who perform manual labor exist in perpetual misery, their lives consumed in endless work that serves no purpose beyond maintaining the fortress's basic functions. The dark forges within these fortresses produce ammunition and equipment necessary for the Warbands' operations, their output supplementing what can be acquired through raids or purchased from larger demon forges. These facilities operate on smaller scales than dedicated forge worlds, but provide crucial capabilities that allow warbands to maintain independence from external suppliers. The forges employ slave labor extensively, with captives working the production lines under conditions that kill them within months or years, depending on their physical resilience. The warpsmiths who oversee these operations care nothing for worker safety, viewing casualties as inevitable and easily replaced through additional raids. The summoning chambers occupy central positions within most fortress monasteries, their importance reflecting the crucial role that demonic allies play in chaos military operations. These rooms feature permanent summoning circles inscribed into the floor with materials that resist both physical damage and the corrosive effects of warp energy. The circles incorporate containment systems designed to trap summoned demons until the summoner establishes control, preventing the entities from immediately attacking their would-be masters. The chamber's walls bear inscriptions in the dark tongue, phrases that invoke the chaos gods and request their servants' cooperation. Sorcerers conduct regular summoning rituals to maintain relationships with specific demons, the repeated interactions building familiarity that makes future summonings easier and more reliable. The Great Rift's creation during the 13th Black Crusade fundamentally altered the strategic landscape that Chaos Warbands operate within, transforming what had been a stable, if hostile, situation into an environment of unprecedented opportunity. The massive warp storm that now bisects the galaxy provides direct access to regions that previously required warbands to fight their way through heavily defended sectors just to reach viable targets. The Imperium Nihilus, that half of the Imperium cut off from Terra's light by the Cicatrix Maledictum, presents thousands of worlds suddenly vulnerable to attack without the reinforcements and coordination that the Astronomican's guidance previously enabled. Chaos forces pour through the Rift's tributaries and branches, their raids striking systems that have never faced direct assault from the Eye of Terror's inhabitants. The exploitation of these new routes proceeds according to each warband's capabilities and objectives. The Black Legion conducts systematic campaigns aimed at claiming key strategic positions within the Imperium Nihilus, their forces seizing forge worlds and naval bases that provide forward operating locations for extended operations. Abaddon's strategic vision recognizes that the Great Rift represents an opportunity to establish permanent chaos presence in regions previously secured by Imperial authority, transforming temporary raids into lasting conquests that cannot be easily reversed. The Word-bearers dispatch missionary fleets through the Rift's passages, their dark apostles seeking populations whose faith in the Emperor has been shaken by their sudden isolation from Terra. These worlds prove remarkably susceptible to corruption, as the absence of reinforcement and the visible evidence that the Emperor cannot protect them creates psychological vulnerabilities that skilled preachers exploit ruthlessly. The Night Lords and other piratical warbands treat the Imperium Nihilus as a hunting ground, where they can operate with minimal interference from the coordination that usually makes Imperial responses effective. A world that calls for help receives no answer, its astropathic messages lost in the warp storms, or simply unheard by authorities overwhelmed with similar pleas from thousands of other systems. The raiders strike with impunity, their attacks designed to spread terror and acquire plunder rather than hold territory. They descend on isolated outposts and shipping lanes, destroying what they cannot carry and leaving survivors to spread word of their depredations. The psychological impact of these raids extends far beyond the immediate casualties, as populations throughout the Imperium Nihilus realize that the protection they believed the Imperium guaranteed has evaporated. The Death Guard launch plague campaigns that exploit the Imperium Nihilus's isolation to achieve infection rates impossible in regions where Imperial authorities can respond quickly. A world that contracts one of Nurgle's gifts finds itself unable to request medical supplies or evacuation, the population forced to endure the disease's progression without hope of relief. The plague spread through trade networks that continue operating despite the broader communication breakdown, merchant vessels carrying infection between systems and creating pandemic conditions across entire subsectors. Mortarian's forces monitor these outbreaks carefully, their plague surgeons analyzing transmission data and mutation rates to refine their understanding of how different diseases perform in various environments. The knowledge gained through these experiments improves the Death Guard's capabilities for future campaigns while pleasing Nurgle with the suffering inflicted. The internal politics within the Eye of Terror operate according to principles that combine elements of feudal hierarchy with pure Darwinian competition, creating power structures that shift constantly as warbands rise and fall based on their success in raids and their ability to dominate rivals. The ancient grudges that divide the Traitor Legions ensure that cooperation remains temporary and transactional, with alliances forming to address specific threats before dissolving back into mutual hostility once the immediate danger passes. The Sons of Horus's fragmentation and transformation into the Black Legion created resentments that persist 10,000 years later. As warbands descended from other Traitor Legions, remember how Horus's pride led the heresy to failure and cost them their Primarch's direct leadership. The World Eaters harbor particular hatred for the Emperor's children, their rivalry dating to the Siege of Terra, when Fulgrim's forces abandoned critical positions to pursue their own hedonistic objectives, while Angron's sons bled in desperate assaults. This animosity manifests in violence whenever the two legions' warbands encounter each other without overwhelming external threats forcing cooperation. A World Eater's warband that discovers Emperor's children operating in the same system will often divert from their original objectives to attack the Slaaneshi forces, their hatred overriding tactical considerations. The Emperor's children reciprocate this hostility, viewing the World Eaters as crude barbarians whose simple-minded devotion to Khorne represents everything unsophisticated about chaos worship. These conflicts waste resources and warriors that could be employed against the Imperium, but the participants consider the violence necessary to maintain their honor and demonstrate their legion's superiority. The Thousand Sons maintain cold relationships with most other Traitor Legions, their sorcerous nature, and the rubrics affects creating barriers that prevent genuine cooperation even when strategic interests align. The other legions view the Thousand Sons with suspicion that borders on fear, as even Chaos Space Marines who have embraced the Warp's corruption recognize that sorcery represents power that transcends normal combat capabilities. A Thousand Sons warband that joins a larger campaign operates independently from the main force, their objectives and methods incomprehensible to warriors who think in terms of direct assault and holding territory. The sorcerers pursue goals that serve their research into the Warp's nature or advance schemes that might not bear fruit for centuries. Their willingness to sacrifice immediate tactical advantages for long-term positioning frustrating allies who expect more straightforward contributions. The competition for resources within the Eye of Terror drives conflicts that erupt with regularity, despite the abundance of demon worlds and corrupted systems available for exploitation. The most valuable resources remain concentrated in specific locations that multiple warbands covet, creating flashpoints where violence becomes inevitable. The demon forges controlled by the Dark Mechanicum represent particularly contested assets, as access to their manufacturing capabilities provides crucial advantages in maintaining equipment and acquiring specialized weapons. A warband that loses its relationship with a forge through political maneuvering or military defeat faces serious operational challenges, their ability to replace losses and repair damaged equipment compromised until they establish new supply arrangements. These forge access disputes sometimes escalate into full-scale wars that draw in multiple warbands on each side, the conflicts consuming resources that dwarf whatever the contested forge could produce. The slave populations captured during raids become another source of inter-warband conflict, particularly when multiple forces participate in the same campaign and must divide the spoils. The negotiations over captive distribution frequently break down into violence, as warbands with different priorities and needs struggle to agree on equitable divisions. A Khornate force that participated primarily to acquire skulls and combat experience cares little for slaves, while an Iron Warriors contingent that requires labor for construction projects views captives as the campaign's primary objective. These differing valuations create disputes where what one warband considers generous compensation strikes another as insulting. The strongest warband typically claims the largest share regardless of their actual contribution to the victory, their ability to enforce their demands through threat of violence overriding any principles of fair distribution. The demonic entities that serve as patrons and intermediaries between warbands and the Chaos Gods actively manipulate these conflicts to serve their own purposes within the Great Game. A greater demon that sponsors two rival warbands might engineer situations where they come into conflict, the resulting violence feeding the demon's power through the emotions and bloodshed generated. The demons view mortal followers as pieces on a game board, their individual fates mattering only insofar as they advance the demon's position relative to rivals within the same god's hierarchy or against servants of opposing powers. A warband that believes it operates according to its own strategic vision might actually be executing moves in a game it cannot perceive, their actions serving purposes that benefit their patron while appearing to advance their own interests. The Black Crusades represent the only occasions when Abaddon successfully imposes coordination on the fractious warbands that inhabit the Eye of Terror, his authority during these campaigns approaching what a Primarch commanded during the Great Crusade. The Chinese letter process begins years before the actual invasion, with Abaddon dispatching emissaries to major warbands throughout the Eye of Terror and beyond. These representatives present the Warmaster's strategic vision and explain how participation will benefit each warband while making clear the consequences of refusal. The most powerful warbands negotiate terms that preserve their autonomy while committing forces to the crusade, their leaders extracting concessions about target selection and spoils distribution in exchange for their support. Smaller warbands receive orders rather than invitations, their options limited to compliance or facing the Black Legion's wrath. The assembly of forces for a Black Crusade creates temporary concentrations of chaos power that rival anything seen since the Horus Heresy, with hundreds of warbands gathering their strength for coordinated assault. The staging areas within the Eye of Terror become scenes of controlled chaos as disparate forces arrive and establish their positions, the various warbands maintaining careful separation to prevent the violence that proximity would otherwise trigger. Abaddon's representatives coordinate the deployment schedule, assigning each warband specific objectives and routes that minimize the risk of friendly fire while maximizing the pressure on Imperial defenses. The word-bearers conduct massive ceremonies that invoke all four Chaos Gods simultaneously, their rituals binding the assembled forces together through shared religious experience that temporarily overrides their mutual hostility. The actual execution of Black Crusades demonstrates both the tremendous power that coordinated chaos forces can bring to bear and the limitations imposed by the Warbands' fundamental inability to maintain unity beyond the immediate crisis. The initial assaults achieved devastating success as the combined strength of multiple legions worth of Chaos Space Marines strikes at targets that expected to face individual warbands or small raiding forces. Imperial defenses designed to repel company-strength attacks collapse when confronted by entire armies supported by Demon Legions and Dark Mechanicum war engines. The Chaos forces advance rapidly during these opening phases, their momentum carrying them deep into Imperial territory before the Imperium can organize effective responses. The coordination begins deteriorating once the easy victories end, and the campaign enters its grinding phase, where progress requires sustained effort against prepared defenses. Warbands that achieved their specific objectives lose interest in continuing the broader offensive, their leaders seeing no reason to expend their warriors' lives for goals that benefit Abaddon more than themselves. The ancient rivalries resurface as warbands compete for glory and plunder, their mutual hostility sometimes erupting into open combat despite the ongoing campaign against Imperial forces. Abaddon maintains overall cohesion through a combination of political maneuvering and direct threats, his personal interventions preventing complete dissolution, while accepting that some degradation of coordination is inevitable. The threat assessment that Imperial military planners conduct regarding Black Crusades recognizes these coordinated offensives as existential dangers that require responses drawing on resources from across the Imperium. A Black Crusade in its early phases possesses the strength to conquer entire sectors if not confronted by comparable force, the assembled Chaos Warbands fielding more Chaos Space Marines than some Space Marine chapters possess total warriors. The Imperial response typically involves mobilizing multiple chapters, Imperial Guard armies numbering in the millions, and significant Navy assets to establish defensive lines that can absorb the initial assault's momentum. The strategy focuses on trading space for time, allowing Chaos forces to advance while organizing the counteroffensives that will exploit the inevitable coordination breakdown as the crusade matures. The Cadian Gate's destruction and the Great Rift's creation vindicated Abaddon's strategic approach while demonstrating the potential consequences when Black Crusades achieve their objectives completely. The 13th Black Crusade succeeded where previous efforts had been judged failures by Imperial observers who misunderstood Abaddon's actual goals. The Warmaster never intended to conquer and hold Cadian territory permanently, as such occupation would require resources better spent on continued offensive operations. Instead, he sought to destroy the pylons that stabilized reality in the region and contained the Eye of Terror's expansion. The successful elimination of these ancient structures triggered the catastrophic warp storm expansion that created the Cicatrix Maledictum, achieving strategic effects that will shape the galaxy's future for millennia regardless of what happens to the specific territory the Crusades' forces occupied. The temporal distortions within the Eye of Terror and other warp storms create situations where veterans of the Horus Heresy continue fighting alongside warriors who turned traitor within the last few centuries, their subjective experiences of time's passage differing by orders of magnitude. A Chaos Lord who participated in the Siege of Terra might have experienced only a few decades of subjective time, despite 10,000 years passing in real space, their memories of fighting alongside Horus remaining fresh and immediate. These ancient warriors maintain hatreds and loyalties formed during the heresy with undimmed intensity, their perspective on the long war shaped by personal experiences of the Imperium's betrayal rather than inherited grievances. They speak of the Emperor's broken promises as recent events, their bitterness over monarchy as destruction, or the persecution of Lorgar's faith undiminished by millennia that never occurred for them. The integration of these heresy veterans with more recent renegades creates cultural tensions within warbands that must accommodate warriors operating from fundamentally different frames of reference. A Chaos Space Marine who turned from the Emperor's light during the 41st millennium knows only the Imperium as it currently exists, a grinding totalitarian regime that crushes individuality and worships a corpse god who offers nothing but demands for sacrifice. Their hatred stems from personal experiences of the Imperium's oppression and the hypocrisy of its claims to represent humanity's salvation. The heresy veteran views the same Imperium through the lens of what it replaced, remembering when the Emperor walked among his armies and the imperial truth promised enlightenment rather than blind faith. These different perspectives sometimes align in their hatred of what the Imperium represents, but they can also create friction regarding tactics, objectives, and the very purpose of the long war. The heresy veterans typically occupy positions of authority within their warbands based on their experience and the power they have accumulated over subjective centuries of warfare. Their leadership styles reflect the doctrines and cultures of the legions they served during the Great Crusade, creating continuity with traditions that newer recruits learned secondhand. A World Eater's champion who fought at Istvan III maintains the gladiatorial practices that Angron instituted, their warband's culture shaped by direct transmission from someone who learned these traditions from warriors who served alongside the Primarch himself. This living connection to the heresy provides legitimacy and authenticity that warbands lacking such veterans cannot match. Their claims to represent their legion's true traditions, weakened by the absence of warriors who actually experienced that era. The eternal nature of existence within the warp's timeless realm means that Chaos Space Marines who survive long enough effectively achieve a form of immortality, their lives extending indefinitely as long as they avoid death in battle or consumption by the entities they serve. A warrior who entered the Eye of Terror during the Great Scouring might emerge during the era Indomitus having aged only decades, while the galaxy around them transformed beyond recognition. This temporal displacement creates psychological challenges as the veterans struggle to adapt to an Imperium that bears little resemblance to what they remember, its technologies degraded, and its ideology transformed from the imperial truth's rationalism to the imperial cult's religious fervor. The changes confuse and enrage these ancient warriors, who view the current state of humanity as evidence that the Imperium's victory in the heresy led to exactly the stagnation and decline that Horus warned against. The strategic implications of this temporal distortion affect how Chaos forces plan and execute their campaigns, as warbands operating from within warp storms cannot reliably predict how much real space-time will pass during their subjective experiences. A warband that retreats into the Eye of Terror to repair and refit might emerge after what feels like months to discover that centuries have passed, and the sector they intended to raid again has been completely reorganized. The opposite occurs equally often, with warbands spending subjective years preparing for campaigns only to emerge and find that mere weeks elapsed, their target's defenses unchanged, and their intelligence still current. This unpredictability forces Chaos commanders to build flexibility into their planning, accepting that they cannot control the temporal variables and must adapt to whatever situation they encounter upon returning to real space. The Long War's continuation across 10,000 years of real space-time demonstrates the fundamental incompatibility between the Imperium and Chaos, their conflict representing more than simple military competition for territory or resources. The Traitor Legions fight to destroy the Imperium and prove that the Emperor's vision for humanity was flawed from its inception, their every victory validating their choice to embrace Chaos and reject the constraints that the imperial system imposed. The Imperium fights for survival against an enemy that cannot be negotiated with or appeased, whose very existence threatens humanity's future, and whose corruption spreads through contact like a disease. This existential nature ensures that the conflict will continue as long as both sides possess the strength to wage war, neither capable of accepting peace while the other survives. The era Indomitus presents unprecedented challenges and opportunities for both sides, as the Great Rift's creation fundamentally altered the strategic balance. The Chaos warbands exploit their new advantages ruthlessly, their raids into the Imperium nihilus achieving successes that would have been impossible during the previous 10 millennia. Yet the Imperium adapts with characteristic resilience, the Primaris Space Marines, and other innovations providing capabilities that help offset the rift's strategic impact. The conflict intensifies as both sides commit additional resources to the struggle, the stakes raised by the recognition that the current era might determine which force ultimately prevails. The warbands that wage the Long War understand that they fight for goals that transcend their individual survival, their participation in this eternal conflict giving meaning to existences that might otherwise be consumed by the same meaningless violence and excess that characterizes the Eye of Terror's internal politics. They are the chosen warriors of the Dark Gods, the instruments through which chaos will eventually consume the galaxy and prove that the Emperor's dream of a rational, ordered human civilization was always doomed to fail.